The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26 Potions. After a brief silence, Snape slowly stepped down from the podium and began to patrol the desks. I hope you understand that the purpose of coming here is to learn the precise, rigorous science of potions, and nothing else. Of course, I don't expect you to truly grasp the wonderful feeling of a simmering cauldron, white smoke billowing, wafting with delicate fragrance. But for me to catch anyone coming here perfunctorily, wantonly causing trouble, huh? At this point, Snape deliberately paused, his gaze fixed on Harry. Aha, I almost forgot. Some of you are born with considerable fame, so great that your names are household names. It seemed like a compliment, but everyone could hear the sarcasm in Snape's words. Especially since Snape was staring at Harry in silence, the target of his sarcasm was clear. Potter, tell me what would happen if I added powdered narcissus bulbs to a mixture of wormwood. Harry looked confused. What narcissus bulb powder? What was wormwood? He already regretted listening to Ron, and even more so, shouldn't have given up on his pre-class preparation. Despite this, Harry could only look to Ron for help, hoping this friend, born into a wizarding family, could offer some pointers. However, Ron's face was vacant, as if he hadn't woken up yet. Okay, let's change the question, Snape said, his tone unchanged, though a subtle glint of disappointment flickered in his eyes. Potter, if I asked you to find a bezoar, where would you go? Harry's innocent gaze met his response. Gazing at the enchanting emerald green, Snape persisted, asking, tell me, what's the difference between aconitum naviculatum and aconitum davidinum? I'm sorry, Professor, I don't know. But I think Miss Granger knows. Why don't you ask her? Hermione. Harry was already growing increasingly frustrated by the barrage of questions. He couldn't understand why this professor was so insistent on challenging him, even when Hermione's hands were practically reaching the ceiling. Harry Potter contradicted the professor. 2 points from Gryffindor. Snape's deep voice echoed through the classroom. After deducting the points, Snape still ignored Hermione, who raised her arms beside him, and turned to look elsewhere. Swinburne. Professor, the answer to the first question is the water of life and death. The second question is about fecal stones and goat stomachs. And the last question is that there's no difference between the two types of aconitum, both of which are called aconitum. Ino answered all the questions in one breath. Honestly, while he wasn't particularly interested in potions and hadn't even opened the textbook to study, the famous 3-question series proved no problem for him. His fluent answers amazed everyone, including Hermione, who was observing Ino with a kindred spirit. Hell, I didn't ask you to answer the last question, but considering your answer is excellent, 5 points from Slytherin, Snape said calmly. Now, tell me what learning potions means to you, or what you believe the fundamental purpose of potions is. It seemed a simple question, but it was one Snape had carefully chosen. Whether it was money, fame, power, or even immortality, potions could all be obtained, and he wanted to see Ino's answer, to test some of his theories. What did it mean? Ino was a bit confused, finding it hard to believe such a question came from Snape. But then he realized it was a good thing. If Snape had asked about the contents of 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, he would have been completely clueless. After a moment's reflection, he had the answer. Professor, potions, to me, are simply a means to prevent tragedy, to relieve the pain of those in pain, to heal the wounded. Snape's voice seemed to possess a magical power, for in that brief moment of thought, Ino's mind involuntarily flashed back to many past events. Someone burned by hot soup, denied proper treatment, could only hide in a corner, blowing on their wounds and silently weeping, afraid to even twitch, lest the older children scold them. A tender little girl was brutally beaten, left on a cold, hard bed for days, neglected. Late at night, she muttered to herself, saying her mother would come one day, so she didn't feel any pain now, and she couldn't cry because her mother didn't like crying children, and she had to wait forever. But a week later, the girl was nowhere to be seen. The nurse said her injuries were too severe. From then on, the sobs and comforting cries of comfort were no longer heard at night. In the bitter winter, a group of children in thin shirts huddled together for warmth in an orphanage. But the following spring, he would notice that a few familiar faces were missing from the group. Each incident flashed through his mind like a movie. Meanwhile, Snape had already silently cast Legilimency, simultaneously concentrating his Occlumency with all his might. While avoiding being affected, he also sought to see everything as clearly as possible. Perhaps he hadn't initially intended such extreme measures, but thinking of those emerald eyes. Now, Snape had only one thought: to protect, yet also to prevent a recurrence of tragedy. As the person involved, Ino had no idea what Snape was thinking. He was answering purely from the heart. Suffering always strikes at the ordinary, for the ordinary cannot create miracles. Yet, he wanted to be a miracle for the ordinary, as if the miracle had chosen him. And so, a brief silence fell over the potions classroom. A long moment passed. Very good, an excellent answer. 10 points to Slytherin. Snape's tone was unusually light, his previous tenseness gone. After adding the points, he didn't ask anyone else, but turned and walked back to the podium. This move not only left the young wizard somewhat bewildered, but Ino was also baffled. However, this didn't dampen the joy of the surrounding snakes. Remember, this was a one-time 10 points. Of course, when someone was happy, someone else was hurt. Take Miss Granger, for example, who was pouting and looking indignant. This seemed unfair to her. She was the only one in the classroom who had raised her hand, but the professor chose to ignore her. Potions class proceeded smoothly. Perhaps it was because Snape was in a better mood. For the next few minutes, Harry was like a powerful magnet, sucking in all of Snape's attacks. Even when Neville knocked over the cauldron, he only received a superficial rebuke. Snape probably didn't want to waste precious points on Neville. Potter, you saw him knock over the cauldron, why didn't you stop him? Do you think you're superior when your classmates make mistakes? 1 point from Gryffindor. Potter, looking around during class, 1 point from Gryffindor. Potter, why are you staring at the cauldron? 1 point from Gryffindor. Snape's deductions were only 1 point each time, which wasn't particularly damaging, but extremely insulting. Faced with the endless taunts and frequent point deductions, Harry felt like he was going crazy. It seemed like nothing he did was right. Daydreaming was accused of not paying attention, and when he did pay attention, he was scolded for being too rigid. After finally making it to the end of Get Out of Class, he was labeled a contempt of class for packing up too quickly, and another point was deducted. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 27 Ino's Trump Card. After potions class, the Gryffindor Lions fled the classroom. How could Dumbledore choose such a man as a professor? Look at that expression, Harry. I have no doubt he would have hurt you if it were just the two of you in the room. In the corridor, Ron, as always, was his strategist, analyzing Snape with a firm tone. Forget it, Ron. Harry waved his hand, feeling somewhat exhausted. After an hour of relentless bombardment, he just wanted to find a quiet place to think about where he had offended the other party. It's extremely rude to talk about a professor behind his back, Hermione's voice echoed behind them. Excuse me, please make way. Miss Granger raised her head and walked past them. Before Hermione could even get out of the way, Ron said indignantly, look at her haughty attitude. Even Neville can see that the old bat is targeting you and Gryffindor, and yet she still respectfully calls him Professor Bat. Ron. Let's go. Let's go find Hagrid, in the little room outside the castle. Harry just wanted to get away, somewhere he could relax. Okay. I don't have any classes this afternoon anyway, Ron shrugged, accepting Harry's suggestion. Meanwhile, after potions class, Ino also returned to his dorm. Honestly, he was increasingly finding Malfoy a great roommate. Not only did he have a morning wake-up call, but even during lunch break, Malfoy would come in and wake him up. Most importantly, Malfoy was truly wild. He was known as a homebody. He was often nowhere to be seen all day, often leaving in the morning and not returning until curfew. This not only allowed him to enjoy his own private dorm room, but also allowed him to practice magic without restraint. Despite the castle's vast size, finding a quiet place to practice magic was truly difficult. If you chose the corridors, you had to be wary of the elusive Filch. If you were in an abandoned classroom, you had to be wary of the other energetic young wizards. In short, finding a place at Hogwarts where you wouldn't be disturbed was truly difficult. Perhaps only the legendary Room of Requirement on the 8th floor truly offered a safe and private place. Only a fool would go to the room of requirement. Ino sighed, looking at his empty dorm. He also expressed his sincere gratitude to Malfoy and Harry. It wasn't that he didn't want to go to the room of requirement, but the circumstances didn't allow it. While the sorting might seem like a passing moment, the reality was that now was the most crucial time. Dumbledore, the two-faced squirrel, neither of them was easy to deal with. And Snape's unusual question today, now that he thought about it, wasn't that simple. Everyone's playing behind the scenes, huh? You'd better not mess with me. Thinking of his future, Ino reached for the secret pocket in the inner lining. There lay the most precious possessions he'd accumulated over the past 2 years. Even old John's bag of gold coins was merely stored in a traceless extended box. Shattered into pieces. Returning to his dorm room and resting briefly, Ino began his daily spell practice. As the spell rang, a beam of white light shot out from his wand, striking the teacup several meters away. The instant the magic made contact, the teacup shattered with a bang. Restored. The shards of porcelain froze in midair for a moment, then, as if pulled by an invisible force, they reunited, and a brand new teacup appeared on the table. Softening spells, cutting spells, repairing spells, fire spells, even the freezing and expansion spells he'd just learned today. For the next few minutes, Ino attacked, repaired the teacup. In just half an hour, the plain ceramic cup was ravaged by a dazzling array of magical rage. In fact, from his frantic practice in the fantasy world before school started, Ino had already developed a subconscious habit of casting spells. It was like an 18th century cowboy, reflexively pulling the trigger the moment he touched his gun. Some experienced veterans didn't even need to aim, their mind reacted to their thoughts, truly aiming wherever they wanted. In a sense, this kind of marksmanship transcended the realm of physics, becoming somewhat idealistic. Yet, it existed. Historically, in an 1864 battle, the renowned American gunslinger Bill, with 2 revolvers, achieved a feat of 1 versus 100, annihilating his opponent completely without even a scratch. Ino was imitating the cowboys, the reflexes of those old cowboys in duels, eyes, hands, and spells. He knew full well that magic wasn't a turn-based game, and his opponent wouldn't just stand there and engage him in a barrage of fire. In this situation, spell accuracy was paramount. Even a powerful spell like the Killing Curse was useless if it couldn't hit the opponent. Of course, this only applied to single-target spells. If a fire like the Paris Cemetery were to occur, facing a raging fire that could have engulfed the entire city, accuracy, positioning, and dodging would be futile. Meanwhile, on the lawn outside the castle, Harry walked over and knocked on the door of the stone cottage. "Hagrid, we're here to see you." Harry approached and knocked on the door. Then, he and Ron heard a dog barking and heavy footsteps entering the room. Soon, the door opened, and Hagrid's massive figure appeared before them. "Harry, you're here. Come on in. I have some fresh raw cakes baked this morning. You can take some as a snack when you go back. They're a rare delicacy." Hagrid greeted Harry warmly, soothing his restless teeth with his cushion-sized hand. It was Harry's first time at Hagrid's place, and upon entering the hut, he couldn't help but look around. The hut consisted of only one room, so the overall layout seemed a bit cluttered. There were even dried meats and hams hanging by the windows. In the center of the room stood a large stove, boiling black tea on it. Patched beds were placed against the walls on either side. "Come on, sit down anywhere. Don't be shy here." Hagrid brought a plate of raw cakes to the table and sat down first. The wooden chair creaked, and Harry was apprehensive, fearing it wouldn't hold up to Hagrid's immense size. Sitting down, Hagrid, belatedly noticing Ron's presence, began to mutter quietly. "Another redhead. I hope he'll behave himself." However, Ron heard every word of Hagrid's supposedly quiet words. Ron's face flushed immediately, but before he could stand, Harry grabbed him tightly. "Hagrid. Ron's a friend of mine, too," Harry said. Perhaps sensing the displeasure in Harry's tone, Hagrid rubbed his head and explained to Ron, "All right, I apologize. It's mainly because your twin brothers are always restless and they're just too good at getting into trouble. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please vote for it. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please vote for it." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28, Hagrid the Witty. As the saying goes, when two people have a common enemy, their bond quickly grows stronger. It was only a short while into the new semester, and Ron was still furious with George and Fred for deceiving him during the sorting ceremony. Now, hearing Hagrid's rants about George and Fred, Ron felt like he'd found a kindred spirit and immediately joined the fight. Harry looked across at the two men. The previous tension was gone. They now looked more like long-lost friends, chatting away. Though the scene felt a bit strange, Harry didn't interrupt. Instead, he seemed to enjoy it. He didn't have many friends at Hogwarts, so he was glad Ron and Hagrid were able to chat. This conversation lasted for over half an hour. Ron was so engrossed that, feeling thirsty, he reached for some water, only to find a lone plate of rock pancakes on the table. Look at my memory. Hagrid, realizing Ron's intentions, slapped his head and hurriedly got up to get the tea boiling on the stove. While Hagrid was gone, Harry quickly winked at Ron. "Hey, men, what's with your eyes? You keep blinking." Ron asked, confused. "Ron, let's stop talking about your brothers for a minute. I want to know from Hagrid why Snape always picks on me. I haven't provoked him." Harry paused mid-sentence as Hagrid was already heading their way, kettle in hand. Ron, shrewd enough, gave Harry a reassuring look, hinting that he would help him get some information. Hagrid poured the tea and slid back into the wooden chair with a creaking sound. "Hagrid, do you know what we went through today? It was Snape. You didn't see that ferocious look on his face. I bet if there weren't other people around, Snape would have hurt Harry, maybe even killed him." Ron once again expressed his opinion of Snape. However, instead of the acknowledgement Ron had expected, Hagrid, uncharacteristically, retorted, "Hurt Harry? That's impossible. You must be overthinking it. It's not happening." "Hagrid, the truth is, I think Snape hates me deeply," Harry said, finding the perfect moment. "But I've never provoked him. You know, I'd never even met him before coming to Hogwarts." Compared to Ron's exaggerated description, Harry seemed much more reasonable, perhaps due to his recent arrival in Gryffindor. Hagrid stroked his thick beard, feeling a bit overwhelmed by the expectant glances from Harry and Ron. "Well, I can only say that Snape would never hurt you. After all, he's a professor at Hogwarts. Even if you don't trust him, you still have to trust Headmaster Dumbledore." Harry nodded in agreement, and even Ron, standing beside him, rarely objected. "As for Snape targeting you, I mean Snape targeted all of Gryffindor, and you just happen to be the most famous of them all." Hagrid couldn't help but applaud his own cleverness. He'd come up with such a brilliant excuse in such a short time. Harry, on the other hand, looked as if he'd suddenly realized something, as if he'd temporarily accepted the excuse. At least it seemed plausible. Time slipped by silently. 2 days later, one morning, Ino enjoyed his usual wake-up call from Draco, which only solidified his decision to buy an alarm clock. "Draco, you've already sprayed your hair with hairspray 3 times. Are you sure it won't damage the roots?" Ino half-leaned against the headboard, watching Malfoy's dazzling maneuvers. He couldn't understand why a simple flying lesson required waking up at 6 and then applying makeup. Sorry, he used the word makeup because he simply couldn't understand why a normal boy would get up so early in the morning and spray himself with perfume. He even spent half an hour in front of the mirror, just adjusting his hairstyle. "Ino, what do you think of this shirt?" Malfoy ignored the question about the hairspray and asked about his own shirt instead. "Great. It looks fresh, and the color is well chosen," Ino replied, his words half-heartedly. Honestly, if it weren't for the daily wake-up call, he really wanted to tell him that no one would lift up your robe to admire the shirt hidden under your robe. "That's good. Hurry up and wash up, and don't forget your flying class. I'm going to the auditorium first." With that, Malfoy left the dormitory without looking back. A few minutes later, Ino also sat up in bed. He was also looking forward to the flying class. It was not only a yearning for the sky that was innate in humans, but also a matter of his future survival. Although fantasy worlds seemed to be always safe at the moment, no one would mind having an extra means of survival, even if it was just for traveling. "Maybe I can only buy a magic carpet." As Ino pondered this, he glanced at the suitcase beside his bed. Even though it had been enlarged by the extension charm, It still wasn't big enough for a broomstick. It seems there aren't any magic carpets for sale in England. I'll be busy this summer. Just as Ino was planning her summer shopping trip abroad, on the other side of the castle, in the Great Hall, Malfoy finally ran into the person he'd been waiting for. Seeing Harry and Ron appear in the Great Hall, Malfoy instantly discarded his pure-blood dignity and burst into a loud voice. Before coming to Hogwarts, I was already a skilled broomstick pilot. One time, my dad was flying me all the way home, and we were almost hit by a Muggle plane. If I hadn't dodged in time, the Muggle plane might have been destroyed. Surrounded by Slytherin freshmen, Malfoy proudly recounted his legendary experience. At the Gryffindor table, Ron seemed to be drinking milk, but in fact, his ears were already perked up. Harry, are Muggle planes easily damaged? Would that be dangerous for them in the sky? Ron was always the most curious. Malfoy's bragging. Harry shook his head decisively. I've never been on a plane, but if that steel thing, hundreds of feet long, were to hit us head on, neither he nor his father would be spared. Merlin's socks. Hundreds of feet? That's bigger than a dragon. Ron's eyes were filled with shock. He couldn't imagine how something so much bigger than a dragon could fly, especially one made of steel. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy noticed Harry glance in his direction, which only heightened his interest. He recounted not only how he dodged Muggle planes, but also raced with dragons, flew with thunderbirds, and so on, one bizarre and fantastical adventure after another. The exaggerated embellishments and flowery language made Ino, who had just arrived at the Great Hall, stop and listen. At that moment, he even thought that if Malfoy changed his profession and became a bard, he might really create a glorious legend. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 29 Flight Lesson, Verification and Conjecture. The farce in the Great Hall lasted over half an hour before it ended. It wasn't because Malfoy had finished his lecture, but because it was time for class. At 9 a.m., outside the castle, Madame Hooch appeared on her broomstick. She circled the students before landing gently on the lawn. Before class begins, I must emphasize that you must follow my instructions when you begin flying. Of course, if you want to fall dozens of feet and end up bedridden for the rest of the semester, then you're welcome. Like all professors, Madame Hooch laid out the stakes in her first class. Everyone, come here. I'll only show you once. Madame Hooch walked up to the front of the class and began demonstrating the correct flying position. Just as everyone was about to practice commanding their brooms to take flight, a voice echoed from the crowd. Professor, I have a question. Ino raised his hand and looked at Madame Hooch. His gesture caught everyone's attention, especially Hermione, whose eyes widened with curiosity. That's great. Ask your questions now. Same with you guys, don't let anything go wrong once we're flying. Madame Hooch looked at everyone with a serious expression, then walked over to Ino. Alright, kid. Now tell me what you're wondering. Professor, I don't understand how brooms can carry us through the sky. If it's just magic, then why are there different brands and models, resulting in different speeds and performance? I mean, if it's just magic, should they all have the same speed? Ino asked in one breath a question he had harbored for years. He was curious about how brooms worked. If they simply carry people, that wouldn't be surprising at all, and could be directly attributed to magical wonder. But they acted like machines, with different brands and models, and even different focuses, making it difficult to explain them in terms of magic. Sorry, kid. Your question is beyond my knowledge, so I can't answer it. But if you have any questions about flying techniques, or even safety tips, you can always come to me. Madame Hooch openly admitted her shortcomings. She didn't express embarrassment at being unable to answer a student's question, nor did she fabricate an explanation to evade the student. But I suggest you take alchemy in your 6th year, or go to the library and find the answers yourself. Thank you for your valuable advice, Professor. Faced with Madame Hooch's candidness, Ino remained true to her students' basic courtesy. A friendly exchange of views ensued, and neither Madame Hooch nor Ino saw anything wrong with it. But they forgot the young wizards watching from the sidelines, especially the Slytherin students, many of whom even expressed admiration. After all, for a student to stump a professor with a question was a remarkable achievement in itself, even if it was just about flying. Compared to the Slytherin students, the Gryffindors were far more complex, with some approving, some silent, some dismissive. But Miss Granger, alone, gazed thoughtfully at Ino, her thoughts unfathomable. After this brief hiccup, Madam Hooch resumed her lesson. Listen up. When I blow the whistle, push off the ground as hard as you can. Remember to hold on to your brooms tightly. Just try to get a few feet up. Finally hearing they could fly, the young wizards, including Malfoy, were all excited. However, Ino remained unmoved. Perhaps after pretending to be a fortune teller for so long, he wanted to test the inertia of fate. It was like Hermione's failure to arrogantly mention a history of Hogwarts during the sorting ceremony, thus avoiding her first clash with Ron. But unlike the previous innocents, what was about to happen was of great importance. It directly affected Harry's chances of making the Quidditch team. Only by joining the team would the trio begin to doubt Snape during the match, and even set in motion all the subsequent developments. All he had to do now was to quietly watch and see if Neville would lose control of his broom again, as in the novel. A quarter of an hour later. As fate would have it, the inevitable event finally arrived. Help me! Neville's shrill cry for help echoed from midair. The old broom, like a wild horse, flew dozens of feet into the air in the blink of an eye. On the ground, all the young wizards were in a state of panic. But Ino remained unmoved. He didn't show off his half-baked magic, nor did he attempt to save anyone or gain points. Remember, this is Hogwarts. A student falling to death in broad daylight? You must be kidding. If Neville were in real trouble, he would turn around and leave without hesitation. Whoever falls in love will be taken away, and Hogwarts isn't the only school in Europe. Mid-air, Neville desperately grasped the broom, struggling precariously. It now appeared that he was at least 60 feet above the ground, which is about 18 meters, about 7 or 8 stories high. Don't underestimate this height. Given Neville's round figure, the chance of death from a fall is quite high. Yet, everything was filled with drama. Neville did fall, but only injured his arm. After Madam Hooch personally escorted Neville to treatment, events unfolded much like the novel. Malfoy and Harry engaged in a fierce and furious aerial battle for Neville's rem umbrella. For the other young wizards, this aerial duel was a rare spectacle. Ino didn't even bother to look up, his mind preoccupied with Neville's broomstick finally losing control. Was it the inertia of fate, or something else entirely? It also made him wonder if the doomed was truly unchangeable. If not, why did such trivial matters change? What was the point of divination? Meanwhile, in the sky, Malfoy and Harry's fight intensified. As Malfoy threw his rem umbrella with all his might, Harry soared like an arrow. Flying at full speed, he managed to snatch the falling rem umbrella less than 2 feet from the castle. Not only did Harry complete the extreme maneuver, he also did a silky smooth turn at the end, landing steadily in midair. But no one noticed Professor McGonagall's shocked and angry expression behind the window. The flying lesson was ultimately a hasty one. Due to the previous teaching incident, after Madam Hooch returned, she no longer let the young wizards fly in groups, but chose to teach the most clumsy ones one-on-one. The process was a bit tedious and tortuous, but fortunately, everyone learned how to control the broom to fly. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. As long as you can master the balance, the rest can only be left to time. New book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend. Please vote. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend. Please vote. Chapter 30 Malfoy's Counterattack. How could they do this? Scar had clearly broke the school rules. I need to write a letter to my dad. Malfoy complained loudly in his dorm. 3 days had passed since the last flying lesson, and after a spectacular maneuver, Harry had been successfully apprehended by Professor McGonagall. Just when everyone expected Harry to receive a severe punishment, a dramatic twist occurred. Not only had Harry been selected for the house Quidditch team, but he had also been given the crucial role of Seeker. When the news reached Slytherin, Malfoy's defenses were instantly broken. Yesterday afternoon, he had been discussing Harry's punishment with everyone in the common room. He was savagely slapped in the face. He returned to his dorm, having suppressed his anger, but at that moment, Malfoy could no longer contain himself. Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Neville, the instigator, the Gryffindors who had been watching, and even Harry's owl, were all the targets of his tirade. After listening to Malfoy's grumbling for over half an hour, Ino could no longer contain himself. Draco, do you know why Slytherin's symbol is a snake? Because even when they fail, snakes don't lose heart or complain. They simply hide in the shadows and quietly prepare, cultivating strength, resilience, and determination in the shadow of adversity, then find the perfect moment to strike the fatal blow. In the dormitory, the bard's distinctive cadence captivated Malfoy's mind as he told his story. Its eyes are so clear and deep, its body is sinuous and graceful, its tail is agile and elusive. Every swaying movement reveals its unpredictable nature and its ability to adapt to the environment. Draco, remember, you are a true Slytherin. So don't imitate those toads, they can only make noise. Ino didn't offer direct persuasion, but instead used anthropomorphic metaphors, implicitly praising Malfoy while subtly redirecting his thoughts. Sure enough, the effect was immediate. Malfoy seemed to appreciate this tactic. He pondered quietly for a long moment, then slapped his thigh. You're right. I'm a Slytherin, and I'll find an opportunity to teach Scarhead a lesson he won't forget. It was unclear what Malfoy was thinking, but his eyes were brightening, and even two unnatural blushes rose on his cheeks. It seems you've understood. Congratulations, a true Slytherin. But it's late now, so if you have nothing else to do, go to bed. Seeing that Malfoy had stopped complaining, Ino didn't hesitate to praise him. Oh, and don't forget to wake me up tomorrow morning. With that, he simply pulled down his bed curtains, ignoring Malfoy beside him. Time always slipped away quietly in the peaceful days. Before he knew it, 2 weeks of his first year had passed. During this time, Ino not only got to know Hogwarts, but also found his own rhythm. Aside from the usual routine of going to the classroom and library, he spent most of his time practicing magic in his dorm or going to the astronomy tower, admiring the sunrise while chanting to himself. Speaking of chanting, it's impossible not to mention the accompanying instruments. Although he had overestimated magic, he was still amazed by the self-playing accordion. The accordion Diagon Alley had purchased for 10 galleons before the start of school was incredibly perfect. Not only did it play automatically, but it could even recognize sounds and store music arrangements. Once, he casually hummed a Schubert serenade. The accordion automatically recognized the tune and stored it in a 5-line, 7-note format. It was like a multifunctional tape recorder, ready to play on a loop anytime, anywhere. Slytherin dormitory. After a day of classes, Ino quietly leaned back in his chair to rest for the morning. Next to him lay an open copy of Practical Household Magic. That's right, household magic. This wasn't some muggle book like The British Housewife, teaching how to do laundry, cook, and clean. Obscurus Publishing's Practical Household Magic was, in a sense, far more valuable than the standard book of spells. It could even be considered an encyclopedia of spells, as it not only contains a wide variety of spells, but also the methods and techniques for casting spells. Half an hour later, Ino slowly opened his eyes, waved his wand, and the accordion played a soothing melody. Listening to music, reading books, and practicing magic every day. To be honest, he has begun to love the privileges of Slytherin. If you were really sorted into Gryffindor, given the Lion House dormitory described in the original book, it would probably be a luxury to be able to do homework quietly, let alone practice magic. After all, no one can expect the noisy and energetic little lions to become well-behaved. Bang! Just as Ino was about to change the song, the dormitory door was roughly pushed open. I just challenged Scarhead to a duel in the Great Hall, and he accepted. It's tonight, midnight, in the trophy room. Back in the dorm, Malfoy rushed to recount his recent experience, how he'd left Harry speechless, and how Weasley was no match for a yes-man. By the way, could you come with me tonight? I'll be your assistant, and together we can teach Scarhead and his henchmen a lesson. Sorry. I won't break the school rules. Ino refused without a second thought. You must be kidding. If the acceptance letter is the key to the path of magic, then a midnight duel is the beginning of the adventure. God knows how many eyes will be watching this duel from behind. He had finally kept a low profile for over half a month, finally fading from public view. Only a fool would jump out and become the center of attention again. Malfoy, on the other hand, seemed to have expected this outcome and wasn't angry at Ino's refusal. Alright. Then we'll just have to follow my plan. Scarhead's done for. Yeah, and that Weasley too. Seeing Malfoy sink into some kind of self-indulgent state, sitting there with a goofy grin on his face, Ino instinctively stood up, grabbed his accordion, and headed for the door without looking back. Common room. Mr. Swinburne. Are you leaving? As Ino left the dormitory, he heard a crisp voice behind him and stopped immediately. "Good afternoon, Miss Parkinson and Miss Greengrass." Before him stood two girls from his grade, Pansy and Daphne. Seriously, these two girls were considered the stars of their class. Although the original novel didn't describe them much, after spending some time with them, Ino knew that these two girls were no pushovers. This wasn't to say that the girls were bad, but rather that they inherited the Slytherin tradition, shrewd, cunning, and yet elegant. "So you're going out to practice?" Pansy's eyes flicked to the accordion beside her as she spoke. Daphne, beside her, also took up the conversation, jokingly saying, "I wonder if we'd have the pleasure of hearing you play a piece." "Very well. It would be my honor." After a moment's thought, Ino agreed. Since he'd chosen to keep a low profile and blend in with Slytherin, he couldn't be too eccentric. Appropriate socializing was essential. Sometimes being too low-key is a form of publicity. Although I haven't mastered the technique yet, I can tell you a very interesting story. Ino put down the accordion and found a quiet corner in the common room. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 31 Midnight Duel. That night, nearing midnight, Ino heard a rustling in the dormitory, followed a moment later by the sound of a door opening. However, less than 20 minutes later, the door opened again. Hearing the noise, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Malfoy truly hadn't changed his ways, or perhaps it was his unwavering loyalty. In any case, this trip was, unsurprisingly, to inform Filch that he was about to catch them in adultery. Let the flowers bloom, let the trees grow. Ino sighed softly as he lay in bed. Other people's stories had nothing to do with him, he was merely a storyteller. The trophy room on the 4th floor. In the moonlight, the crystal glass cases displaying the trophies gleamed, even the trophies, shields, medals, and statues reflecting a faint silver metallic sheen. Silence reigned. Inside, 3 young wizards moved slowly, clinging to the wall. Harry, wand in hand, stared intently at the corridor ahead. It felt as if an enemy might emerge from the darkness at any moment. Time passed by. It's already past midnight, why haven't Malfoy and the others arrived yet? Harry asked nervously. Who knows? Maybe he's scared, or maybe he overslept. But it's okay if Malfoy doesn't come. After all, we've brought this inconvenient little thing along. I wonder why she's joining in the fun. Ron was growing impatient, none of the high spirits he had in the Great Hall that morning. Now he was pointing his finger directly at Hermione. I never even thought of joining in the fun. How many points have you been docked since the start of the semester? Don't you know? Hermione didn't give Ron any slack and retaliated sharply. But she seemed unsatisfied and continued, this is all a scam. Don't you see it yet? A duel at midnight? Only you would believe that, and even goad Harry into it. Listening to the arguments behind him, Harry felt a moment of being tricked. Especially since it was already past midnight, which only made him feel even more like he'd been tricked by Malfoy. Forget it, let's go back. Malfoy won't be coming, Harry said, turning to the two behind him. Let's go. Tomorrow I'll let everyone in Hogwarts know about Malfoy's cowardly behavior. Ron said indignantly. Meanwhile, a sudden noise came from the end of the silent corridor, startling the 3 people and causing them to hold their breath. After a long moment, a staccato muttering echoed in the darkness. Where could those brats be hiding? Don't let me catch you. Hide in the corner. The instantly recognizable drab voice instantly identified the voice as Filch, the caretaker of Hogwarts. Let's retreat quietly, before he notices. Harry said, retreating quietly. But before he could finish his words, there was a clang behind him. Someone had clearly knocked over the trophy. In the darkness, he didn't bother to see who had been so careless, as the piercing noise had already alerted Filch in the distance. I found you, you disgusting little bastards. Run. Don't look back. Hermione grabbed the terrified 2 and sprinted frantically after them. Although they'd been discovered, Filch hadn't seen them face to face. Their only option now was to charge headfirst and deny everything. Hermione's idea was a good one, and Harry and Ron agreed. The 3 of them ran with their heads in their hands. Half an hour later. Harry, still shaken, returned to his dorm. He desperately wanted to go home, to his cramped little room in the attic, He couldn't understand what was wrong with Hogwarts, keeping a car-sized beast so openly in an abandoned hallway. Just as Harry was still recovering from his shock, on the other side of the castle, on the fourth-floor corridor, the door to the three-headed dog's room suddenly closed of its own accord. Then, a brilliant halo of magical light flashed across the door. The wooden door, which Hermione had just unlocked with ease, now felt unbreakable and solid. Slytherin dormitories. After a restful night's sleep, Ino opened his eyes in the morning and saw Malfoy sitting on a chair with a frustrated look on his face. It's no wonder that Malfoy must have run out early in the morning to check the school hourglass. When he found that the Gryffindor points hadn't changed significantly, he must have known that his plan had failed. It's normal to feel a little frustrated. But after all, he's a teenager, and bad moods come and go quickly. After washing up in the morning, Malfoy forgot his previous unhappiness in a short while and turned to talk about today's class. Ino, do you think the professor will teach us some powerful magic in the defense against the dark arts class? I'm really fed up with them all day long, either turning needles or fiddling with a damn feather. Ino was stunned when he heard about the defense against the dark arts class. After regaining his composure, he spoke matter-of-factly. I advise you not to get your hopes up about defense against the dark arts. They won't teach you anything else in your first year. At best, you'll learn a fireworks spell to cast a distress signal. In his eyes, true magic learning should be like this, methodical and gradual. If you start with devastating destruction, that's not magic, it's myth. Ino extinguished Malfoy's hopes, then picked up his defense against the dark arts textbook and pushed the door open to leave the dormitory. Honestly, if he could help it, he really didn't want to face Quirrell or Voldemort at this stage. While he had the protection of Occlumency, it was unclear how effective this protection would be against a once powerful Dark Lord. As Dumbledore once said, don't underestimate the experience of a centenarian. If you consider Voldemort's true age, even in the Muggle world, he would be over 60. Especially at this stage, with those 7 Horcruxes intact, Ino was even less willing to gamble on the other party's wisdom and rationality. Then again, despite his inner resistance, some things had to be faced. There was no way to avoid them. In this situation, he could only go with the flow. After all, any form of evasion was simply a disguised form of attraction. If only I knew the memory charm. Ino muttered to himself. If only he could selectively block his memories, temporarily forgetting all information about Quirrell. Sometimes the more you know, the greater your vulnerability. On the 6th floor of the castle, in the defense against the dark arts classroom. Class was still a quarter of an hour away, but the room was already filled with young wizards. After all, after so long since enrolling, today was finally the day they finally got to attend class. Just listen to the name, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Just those few words combined evoke a strange sense of sophistication. Consequently, both Slytherin and Gryffindor remained silent in the classroom, their faces etched with anticipation. Even Harry and Ron, who had just been tricked by Malfoy, were now just glaring at each other. But unlike in the past, they didn't engage in endless bickering upon meeting. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 32 Hello, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Half an hour later. In the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Quirrell single-handedly eliminated the 1,000-year-old conflicts and disagreements between the Lion and Serpent houses. He successfully unified the two houses, at least on the surface. The strong and pungent smell of garlic made it impossible for the young wizards in the front row to open their eyes. The halting and row teaching method made everyone drowsy and unable to pay attention to anything else. In the classroom, Ino sat in the middle back row, an inconspicuous and unremarkable position. At this moment, he had the same blurry eyes as everyone else, with an expression that looked like he would fall asleep at any moment. The only difference was that others might really not be able to stand Quirrell's teaching, while he was just reacting the whole time. There was no way. Quirrell's ability was not even as good as Aunt Aisha's nagging in the fantasy world. Time passed as Quirrell stuttered and read aloud. Now, you can dismiss the class. Do you have homework? As Quirrell finished his words, the entire classroom felt like a shot of adrenaline, and all the young wizards rushed out the door. Ino blended in with the crowd, following their footsteps. Everything was going well. During the class, he didn't deliberately stare at Quirrell's turban, nor did he ask any strange questions. After landing safely, he was now reflecting on himself. Perhaps he had just suffered from his charm's illness and become a little self-righteous. It was funny, he wasn't Harry, how could he possibly attract all the attention? Besides, whether it was Voldemort or Quirrell, they were all here for the Philosopher's Stone, so they didn't have time to care about irrelevant things. Meanwhile, after leaving the classroom, because it was early, Ino leisurely strolled through the corridors of the school. Like a tourist checking in, he stopped at every window he passed, gazing out at the castle in the distance. Perhaps he had just experienced a tense acting competition and suddenly relaxed. He felt more and more that this carefree campus life was truly precious. Please wait a moment. A staccato voice suddenly came from behind him, nearly sending him into panic mode, his arm instinctively reaching for his inner pocket. Then he realized he'd been too cautious in the bustling corridor in broad daylight. Why are you running so fast? I haven't seen you in the library in the last few days. Did something happen? The voice approached from afar, and Ino finally made out that it belonged to someone completely unrelated to Quirrell. Now, before him was a brown ball, bright eyes and a look of concern. Honestly, this scene touched Ino deeply. Honestly, outside of the fantasy world, Hermione was the first person who had shown him concern without any ulterior motive. Before him, whether living in an orphanage or setting up a fortune-telling stall outside the elementary school, every greeting, attention, and conversation he'd encountered had a purpose. At that moment, Hermione's genuine concern seemed especially precious. I'm asking you, don't just stare blankly. Hermione held out her delicate, white hand and waved it before Ino's eyes. I'm fine, nothing's wrong. I haven't been to the library these past few days. I'm sorting out my knowledge. After all, excessive intake can lead to knowledge slavery. I can't believe I heard Plato's words in that context. I can't understand how you ended up in Slytherin. Hermione's words were filled with regret. I remember answering a similar question of yours in the side hall before the sorting. Before Ino could finish, Hermione tilted her head 45 degrees to the sky and began to imitate Ino's tone. I don't know. Whatever they do, I don't care. Really. You know, your expression back then was really asking for a beating. Really? But I really don't care about sorting. Ino turned, staring into Hermione's eyes, and spoke seriously. After a few seconds of staring, Hermione was defeated, lowering her head and muttering to herself. Please speak louder. I can't hear you. The corridors were always crowded with young wizards during the day, making it difficult for him to hear what Hermione was saying. Nothing. I was just wondering if I could ask you for a divination again. Don't worry, I'll pay. I don't have a lot of galleons, but I have some pounds saved up, Hermione asked nonchalantly. Of course, if you ignored the clenched fists beneath her robes and the restless kicking of her feet, it might have seemed she didn't care. However, Ino didn't notice Hermione's little movements and said casually, of course. And you're welcome to take care of my business. After all, money that comes to your doorstep is too good to refuse. That's good. If I can't find you, I'll write to you at the Owlery, Hermione said happily. The Owlery. Honestly, after hearing Hermione's answer, Ino felt a little uneasy. After all, although Hogwarts has 4 houses, they all have long-standing conflicts with each other. But while houses remain constant, students often change. Students don't simply cut off contact with one another simply because they belong to different houses. Cross-house romances are common, and romances aren't limited to opposite-sex relationships. However, the moment Hermione mentioned the Owlery, he sensed a problem. It had only been a short time since the start of the school year, and yet Hermione seemed isolated from Gryffindor, unable to even find anyone to pass messages. The castle might appear small, but its actual size was far from minimal, and the maze of stairs made locating a specific person difficult without mobile devices. Therefore, passing messages between students became a common tradition. Even the most hostile lions and snakes rarely refused to help pass messages. It was from this that he could guess at the depths of Hermione's situation in Gryffindor. Unbelievably, none of the first-year lions had told her about the tradition of passing messages between houses. Thinking of this, Ino felt a pity and said, "There's no need to spend 2 nuts on a letter. If you can't find me, just leave a note for me in the library and leave it with Madame Pants. Mention my name, and she'll help." Speaking of Madame Pants, he had been making a great effort to get close to her since the first day of school. To use the in-game terminology, her favorability was practically maxed out, so leaving a note or passing a note was a piece of cake. You actually managed to convince Madame Pants to help. Hermione's eyes widened, as if she had heard something unbelievable. Because I'm a good student and never break the school rules, Ino said matter-of-factly. As for abiding by the school rules, he hadn't lost a single point since the start of the term, and had even received a few bonus points every now and then. The topic of abiding by the school rules really hit a nerve with Hermione. For the rest of the day, the two of them walked back and forth along the corridor several times, until nearing noon, when Ino ended their conversation under the pretext of a lunch break. He had no other choice. Hermione felt like someone who had survived on a deserted island for years and suddenly met someone like her, with endless things to say. Horizontal ellipsis. Next time, we'll definitely meet in the library. Ino couldn't help but rub his sore calf. They'd been walking and chatting since 10 a.m. and now, at lunchtime, his legs were sore, but Hermione was completely fine. There was even a slight spring in her step as she left. It was simply incomprehensible. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 33 Chanting on the Astronomy Tower. Hogwarts, Astronomy Tower. Compared to the bustling castle, the Astronomy Tower is always the loneliest, most tranquil place. It was a cold Saturday morning. Ino rose as usual, washed, dressed, and then, carrying his accordion, he ascended to the top of the tower once again. He sat on the ground, quietly waiting for the sunrise. A quarter of an hour passed. As the first rays of dawn shone on the castle's highest spire, it was like a touch of golden magic, making Hogwarts appear majestic and magnificent in the morning light, like a giant that had long guarded this land. The sun rose, its warm rays filtering through every window of the castle and illuminating every corridor. Honestly, Ino truly enjoyed this feeling, sitting quietly, alone, in his own time. The ethereal, soothing music of the accordion drifted to his ears, and he thought of the past that seemed so far away. A lingering memory, a touch of melancholy, thoughts, like a cup of freshly brewed black tea, drifted in the rising mist, then dissipated into the air. The sun is banished to the west, darkness spreads across the earth. Lost is the glory of the past, but you need not grieve. A melodious ballad echoed from the tower's summit, accompanied by the accordion's playing, transporting one into a mysterious, ancient dream. The song, lamenting and sobbing, felt like a gentle breeze brushing past the ears, as if touching the tenderest part of one's heart. About 10 minutes passed. When the song ended, Ino waved his wand, and the accordion obediently fell silent. Clap. Clap. A crisp applause echoed behind him, causing him to look back hurriedly. The power of music. Dumbledore removed his glasses and wiped the mist from the lenses. Good morning, Headmaster, Ino greeted, standing up. Thank you, Mr. Swinburne. You've allowed me to enjoy such a beautiful piece of music, so enchanting. I'd like to know if it has a name. Please forgive an old man's curiosity. You can call me Ino. Ino bowed politely, then continued, as for the name of the song, I call it Ancient Dream. It's supposed to be played on a horsehead fiddle, but as you can see, I only have an accordion. So far, he had acted like a student suddenly praised by the headmaster, reserved yet slightly shy. Excellent name. Dumbledore praised, then waved gently. 2 high-backed chairs and a small coffee table suddenly appeared at the top of the tower. Surprisingly, the coffee table was filled with various candies and 2 cups of steaming black tea. Would you mind chatting with me, Ino? You know, I'm a music lover too. Faced with this sudden invitation, although reluctant, he had no choice but to accept. After all, Dumbledore had already said so much, and the tea and candies were already prepared, so refusing would be a real slap in the face. It would be my pleasure, Headmaster. Hearing this reassuring response, Dumbledore smiled and nodded, walked over to the table, pulled out a high-backed chair, and sat down. Ino, are you interested in playing at the Halloween dinner? I was originally looking for another band, but now there's clearly a better option. Halloween. Okay, Ino suppressed his inner criticism. You know, in the next few years, Halloween at Hogwarts will be incredibly varied and exciting. Eating a whole dish at dinner is a sign of skill and quick hands. Of course, if Dumbledore had mentioned Christmas dinner, He might have given it some serious consideration, but Halloween, whoever wants to go can go. I'm sorry, headmaster. I still have a lot to learn. Perhaps in a few years I'll ask you for a performance. Although Ino declined, he didn't forget to mention the future, giving Dumbledore some face. After all, the headmaster had personally invited him. It's a pity. But I respect your choice, Dumbledore said, his expression unchanged. It seemed he'd expected to be rejected. The tower fell into a brief silence. With Dumbledore silent, Ino was happy to relax. After all, being served hot tea and free sweets so early in the morning was a delight in itself. He casually picked up a piece of butter toffee and put it in his mouth. The rich, milky aroma filled his taste buds, unlike the creamy candies he'd tasted before. In life, only good food can't be wasted. Adhering to the principle of free food, Ino ate 3 pieces of toffee in a row before pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe the sugar residue from the corners of his mouth. It wasn't that he'd had enough, but that there wasn't much left on the plate. The table wasn't large to begin with, but with tea and several different kinds of candy laid out, it was obvious that the quantity of each candy wouldn't be excessive. As a guest, a small portion was already the limit. Anything more might be a bit excessive. However, Dumbledore seemed to see through Ino's thoughts. He reached out and gently tapped the table, and the small table visibly expanded more than twice its size, not only filling up with the butter toffee from before, but also adding several new candies. Honeydukes never disappoints. Oh, and it's a candy shop in Hogsmeade. Maybe you can try it yourself when you're in your 3rd year. If the quality is always this good, I'll definitely be a regular, Ino said, picking up another unknown candy and putting it in his mouth. After all, the headmaster was paying for everything, so it was a rare opportunity to miss out. It wasn't about being petty, it was just a truly rare opportunity. Perhaps Hogwarts is a bit unfriendly to students below the 3rd year. Just imagine, what respectable full-time boarding school doesn't even have a small shop? Pure-blood wizards were fine, albeit a bit troublesome, but at least they could write home and buy things. Muggle students suffered the most, unable to even enjoy magical candy while at school, let alone anything else. Though his mind wandered, Ino never spoke. His motto was to eat more and talk less, perfectly portraying the shy student in front of the headmaster. Dumbledore asked, and he answered. If Dumbledore didn't speak, he remained silent. This kind of communication actually has a special term, awkward conversation. The two chatted haphazardly for a long time, until the sun rose completely over the horizon. I must go home, headmaster. Ino stood up and said to Dumbledore. Thank you for spending so much time with an old man like me. I hope we can have this conversation again. You know, sometimes I get lonely on my own, Dumbledore said, half-jokingly. He made no response to the headmaster's offer, neither accepting nor rejecting it. He simply bowed slightly to Dumbledore, then turned, picked up the accordion beside him, and walked towards the stairs of the astronomy tower. However, just as Ino was about to leave, Dumbledore's voice came from behind him again. Child, you have no need to be afraid, and there is no need to hide from anyone. Because before I die, no one in Hogwarts can hurt you, I promise. New book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket. Chapter 34. 2 months later. Time slips by imperceptibly, like a silent journey, carrying away the bustle of youth and leaving behind the erosion of time. 2 full months have passed since the start of school. During this time, the former freshmen have thoroughly integrated into Hogwarts, their ignorance gradually transforming into familiarity with the castle. Around this time next year, perhaps, as seniors, they will be able to look down upon the new students from the perspective of seniors. Horizontal ellipsis. As November approaches at Hogwarts, the temperature has plummeted below 10 degrees Celsius, and a few more rains will only push it even lower. Fireplaces have been lit in all 4 common rooms, not just Slytherin, but also the 4 houses. The rising flames dispel the chill in the air. Of course, all this seems insignificant to the young wizards in the castle. With the arrival of November, they will usher in their first holiday since the start of school, Halloween. Horizontal ellipsis. The last day of October, in the charms classroom. The key to the levitation charm is to never forget that subtle wrist movement we've been practicing. Professor Flitwick, standing at the podium as usual, Explain the key points of casting the spell to everyone. Wave and shake. Remember, wave and shake, the short professor emphasized in his sharp voice, patiently repeating the words. Precise spell casting is also crucial. Don't forget Berufio, who said instead of F and found himself lying on the floor with a summoned bison standing on his chest. In the classroom, Ino listened attentively. Although he had already mastered the levitation charm, he still learned many practical techniques in charms class. Moreover, Professor Flitwick, with his vast knowledge, always had perfect answers to all his questions. For example, right now, Ino raised his arm again to ask a question. After receiving the professor's permission, he slowly began to ask, Professor, what I'm trying to say is, if I take precautions and deliberately mispronounce the spell, can I get a free bison? Ino had asked a question that had been troubling him for a long time, and it was a very important question for him. After all, in a fantasy world, while people might not starve to death, who would want to gnaw on dry cheese if they could improve their diet with fresh, tender beef? Excellent question, Professor Flitwick said, applauding. In theory, yes. But this involves a more advanced spell, the summoning spell. Just like the basic transfiguration laws you learned in transfiguration class, you can't conjure food out of thin air. Also, I must emphasize here that magic is not creation. Just like this unexpected bison, it wouldn't appear under certain circumstances, such as the deep sea or the desert, where bison don't exist. Professor Flitwick spoke in one breath. Compared to the bewildered eyes of the other young wizards, Ino listened intently and gained his own intuitive understanding. To put it simply, this is similar to the summoning technique in Naruto. The summoning contract equals the surrounding environment. With this prerequisite, one can use a spell or magic to bring summoned creatures to their immediate presence, regardless of location. Horizontal ellipsis. Time passed. In charms class, as more and more feathers levitated above the table, Professor Flitwick's smile never faltered. Near the end of get out of class, more than half the class had successfully cast the levitation spell, leaving the remaining handful with only time to spare. With such excellent performance, Professor Flitwick waved his hand and exempted the class from this week's homework. This decision delighted everyone and allowed them to enjoy Halloween early. After class, everyone's faces were filled with relaxed smiles, especially as the castle was still filled with the alluring aroma of pumpkin. The halls, corridors, and even the moving staircases were now adorned with a variety of colorful Halloween decorations, fluttering bats, low, dark clouds, creepy masks. The overall look was eerie and mysterious. Horizontal ellipsis. Evening. The great hall was ablaze with lights. Everyone gathered for the annual Halloween dinner. At the Slytherin table, Ino, are you starving? Malfoy asked, surprised. He remembered Ino was always taking his time, never fighting or grabbing. Not like now, so unceremonious. Starving. Ino looked up in surprise, then, seeing Malfoy's hesitant expression, suddenly realized what was going on. Today's steak and pumpkin pie are both fantastic, Draco. Just listen to me and eat more. Without waiting for Malfoy's reply, he returned to his plate. Seeing Ino devouring his food, Malfoy pursed his lips and, with some skepticism, took a piece of pumpkin pie and began to eat. Perhaps it was a psychological cue, or something else entirely, but he also detected a different flavor in the pie. The two's unusual dining style drew the attention of the Slytherin congregants. Luckily, both Ino and Malfoy were not to be trifled with, so everyone merely watched with curiosity, unlike Pansy who had previously scolded Goyle and disregarded etiquette for his unruly eating. The banquet proceeded smoothly. Just then, Quirrell, the defense against the dark arts professor, stumbled into the great hall. The troll is in the basement. I think I should let you know. As if carrying out some kind of mission, Quirrell, with a rare lack of stuttering, finished his sentence and then, with a thud, collapsed to the ground. Quirrell was quiet, but the great hall was in chaos. The older students remained composed, but the younger wizards, below the third year, were already panicking. Silence. Dumbledore's voice, enhanced by magic, drowned out everyone else. Prefects. Reorganize the students to return to their dormitories immediately. Needless to say, the Slytherin prefects, including Mond from before, all drew their wands and held them in their hands. Their expressions and demeanor indicated they took the troll in their eyes. This is actually quite normal. If you compare them carefully, there's not much difference between senior wizards and adult wizards. Especially those who hold the position of prefect are truly elite. There's really no reason to be afraid of a troll. Speaking of which, we have to mention the Ministry of Magic's puzzling handling of magical creatures. It's truly baffling that a foolish troll is even classified as XXXX, on the same level as unicorns, horned beasts, and even phoenixes. In the Great Hall, the little snakes followed the prefects in an orderly manner as they made their way to the common room. Ino also followed behind. Although he knew what was going to happen tonight, he had no intention of participating. Perhaps he had considered Hermione's safety before, but after his conversation with Dumbledore in the astronomy tower, he completely understood the headmaster's control over Hogwarts. Listen, there's no need to be afraid, no need to hide from anyone. If it weren't for the castle's inability to operate technology, he would have suspected that he had installed cameras with every angle of vision. Otherwise, how could he know so much? A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please bookmark. Please recommend. Please vote for me. Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me. Please vote for me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Halloween Dinner. Compared to the chaotic Great Hall, the rest of the castle was much quieter. In the girls' bathroom, Hermione huddled in a corner, feeling aggrieved. She couldn't understand what she had done wrong. She'd been following Hogwarts rules and the professor's instructions, working diligently to earn points for her house, but reality had dealt her a harsh blow. Not only her dormmates, but the entire Gryffindor freshman class was subtly ostracizing her. Just like today's charms class, when she'd merely offered a few fair words, Ron and the other boys had mocked and ridiculed her, even calling her names. It's no big deal, and I have friends too, Hermione muttered quietly, her mind slowly picturing a tall, thin boy. Short, dark hair, clear eyes, and a perpetually gentle smile. It should have been a happy occasion, but for some reason, tears began to stream down her cheeks like pearls from a broken string. She wept silently for a long time. Hermione pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and gently wiped her sore nose. She was about to leave the bathroom. After all, today was the annual Halloween dinner. If possible, she didn't want to miss the first holiday since the start of school, especially since she could see him from afar in the Great Hall. However, fate always plays its little tricks. Just as Hermione was about to leave, a huge shadow appeared in front of the bathroom door, accompanied by an indescribable stench. The 12-foot behemoth was easy to spot with its bald head and slightly confused eyes. Troll. Hermione recognized the monster instantly and instinctively wanted to scream, but she reacted in time and covered her mouth tightly. I hope you don't mind my absence. Faced with a threat to her life, Hermione's first thought was her appointment with the Ino library tomorrow. At the same time, the troll had already trudged into the bathroom with its massive feet and approached a faucet. Bang! Perhaps thirsty, the troll swung its massive wooden club and smashed it against the water pipe, sending water gushing out in an instant. Hermione, hiding in the stall, watched the troll sipped. In a split second, she had already mapped out her escape route. The rubble that had just been shattered proved her best ally. Wingardium Leviosa. Hermione whispered the spell, waved it, and a fist-sized piece of rubble floated just in front of the faucet. The sound of the stone's free fall caught the troll's attention. Seeing that this giant, just as described in the book, had an appallingly low IQ, even a simple trick could lead it astray. Hermione was confident in her escape plan. It was simple, she would use the rubble to lure the troll away, giving her ample time to escape even if she was discovered. As long as they weren't blocked here, going to the Great Hall or running up the moving stairs would maximize their safety. Time passed, and, drawn by the falling rocks, the troll moved further and further away from Hermione. Feeling it was far enough away, she prepared to dash out of the bathroom. However, at that moment, two figures suddenly ran through the bathroom door, making a loud noise. One of them swiftly shut the door and, not wanting it to be enough, locked it behind her. Hermione. Get out of here. There's a troll in the basement. Hermione. Unlike the chaotic first adventure of the Iron Trio, the atmosphere in the Slytherin common room was harmonious. The first years gathered in a corner, listening intently to the story. Outside the first-year circle, several older students, seemingly indifferent but with their ears pricked up, sat, Young Simba was banished by his uncle, forced to leave his familiar kingdom and journey into an unknown land. Here, he met his two best friends and teachers, Pumbaa the warthog and Timon the meerkat. Ultimately, Simba defeated his uncle and became the new Lion King. The rainy season arrived as promised, and the lion's territory was once again revitalized. Ino narrated a well-known story of the Lion King amid the soothing melody of the accordion. With the last syllable fading, the story finally came to a close. Papa, Malfoy, Pansy, and the others were the first to applaud, followed by many young wizards who had regained their composure. Ino. Another one, this time with the story of the snake. Malfoy spoke, and at the same time, a golden galleon appeared on the table. Following his example, the other young wizards followed suit with generous donations. Of course, most of the denominations were in silver, with Malfoy, Pansy, and Daphne giving gold galleons. Pay to hear stories, that was the rule Ino had inadvertently revealed in the dorm. After Malfoy's little mem, it had now spread throughout the Slytherin first years. Back to the point. Looking at the pile of money on the table, Ino reluctantly parted ways. After all, he didn't have any good snake stories at the moment. If you don't have a good story, don't try to trick your listeners. Your story must be worth the money they pay. That's what makes a proper bard. Suddenly, Teacher Hunts's advice echoed in his ears. Looking at the money on the table, Ino silently calculated that the money would at least require a classic story to be worth the money. However, the protagonist of the story had to be a snake, which greatly limited his options. After racking his brains, he could only come up with the legend of the white snake, which was a passable fit. But even with the framework, it still needed various additions and polishing. After all, there were cultural differences. The mere story of a human and a demon in love was enough to leave these native English children confused. It's a little late today, so let's wait until next time. Before Christmas at the latest, I'll tell you a story about magic, snakes, and love. Well, Ino had already raised everyone's expectations to the limit. After successfully whetting everyone's appetite, he stood up, bowed slightly, and then slowly walked back to the dormitory. In the dormitory. Ino had just returned to the dormitory when Malfoy pushed open the door, plopped down in a chair, crossed his legs, and said with a playful look on his face, "What do you think of the troll? What's Quirrell up to?" "I don't think much. I came to Hogwarts to learn magic, not to be a trainee Auror," Ino replied seriously. Honestly, he now really thought Hermione shouldn't have been in Gryffindor. She was quite smart, but Harry and Ron had led her astray. Malfoy could see that something was wrong. After all, Quirrell was an adult wizard, so how could he be frightened by a troll? The result? The three of them were stunned and pointed the finger at Snape. In fact, if Quirrell hadn't jumped in at the end, the three of them would probably have made up everything in their own minds. And then they would have frantically added scenes for Snape to fill in the missing logical gaps. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly vote. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly vote. Chapter 36 Fantasy World, New Journey. Time, like an invisible river, propels people's lives forward. Before they knew it, a full month had already passed since Halloween. Perhaps people always tire of the old and love the new. The once sensational troll incidents have slowly faded with time, no longer worthy of being a topic of conversation. December finally brought the first snowfall at Hogwarts. A chill enveloped the castle, and the sudden drop in temperature made everyone reluctant to go out. The once bustling quarters and bustling Quidditch pitch were now deserted. Compared to the bitter cold outside, the young wizards preferred the warmth of the common room, sipping tea and chatting. Gryffindor. In the common room, Harry frowned at the chess game before him. This was the fourth game he had lost to Ron. Now, the situation looked increasingly precarious, as the king was already trembling. Ron, on the other hand, seemed somewhat nonchalant, unconcerned. He even pricked up his ears while playing chess, gathering information of interest. "Hey, look! She's out again. Parvati says she's in a relationship. It seems to be a Hufflepuff, but some say it's a Slytherin. I'd say she's." "Alright, Ron. Stop talking about Hermione behind her back," Harry interrupted with some annoyance. After the troll incident, the three of them had formed a kind of friendship. But what Harry couldn't understand was why Ron and Hermione were always at odds. While Ron wouldn't say anything to her face now, They'd often gossip in private. I'm not slandering her. Ron shrugged, but didn't continue. Instead, he launched into a new conversation. By the way, it's so cold out here, and Hagrid's, well, could he have frozen to death? Meanwhile, on the other side of the castle. After leaving her dorm, Hermione headed straight for the second-floor library. She'd had enough of her roommates nagging and gossip. When the girls sat together, there was nothing they didn't discuss. Just like just now, they'd even compared Ino and Cedric from Hufflepuff. Then, they'd enthusiastically debated which one to choose as their boyfriend. It was as if the two were right in front of them, offering proposals with flowers. I don't know what's going on. In the corridor, Hermione's thoughts grew increasingly irritated, as if an inexplicable fire burned within her. The distance from the Gryffindor common room to the library wasn't far. But you had to be familiar with the patterns of the moving staircases, otherwise, even if you spent half a day, you'd still be stuck on the same floor. But Hermione wasn't afraid of this. With her exceptional memory, she'd already mastered the patterns of all the staircases within a week of school. The journey took just over 10 minutes. Hermione was already in the library lobby. The girl turned her head slightly, her eyes filled with anticipation. Seeing a familiar person in a familiar place, a smile curled up her lips. It was just like the time they met at the elementary school gate a few months prior during summer vacation. Phew. I thought it was cold, so maybe you wouldn't come, Hermione whispered as she sat down. How could that be? Since I got your note, I'll always keep my promise. Ino also controlled his voice. There was no other way. In the library, he couldn't talk without controlling his volume. Even if he had maxed out Madame Pance's favorability, he only gained the privilege of chatting quietly without disturbing others. The speaker may not mean anything, but the listener may take it seriously. Ino's casual reply was unclear how it was interpreted. In short, Hermione's cheeks flushed, and she felt a strange atmosphere enveloping her. Even in her breath, she seemed to smell an intoxicating scent, perhaps like the fragrance of freshly mowed lawn and minty toothpaste. Hey! Stop daydreaming. Seeing Hermione suddenly fall into a strange state, Ino couldn't help but interrupt. Tell me, what do you want from me? Do you want a fortune teller or a story? Can't I ask you for something else? Hermione couldn't help but whisper. Of course, but I always have to ask first. Seeing that it wasn't business, Ino didn't care. He had long since given up on making money from these things. Now, whether it was fortune-telling or storytelling, he was more interested in the fun of it. Ino, do you know Nico? Nicholas Flamel. Time passed. In the evening, in the Slytherin dormitory, Ino opened the traceless extended suitcase and put away the various cheeses, dried meats, and other preservatives he had collected from the kitchen. Then he put in the accordion, cashmere blanket, and several magic books. The reason for all this was that during their afternoon chat in the library, he had felt a long-lost thrill. It was clear that after more than 5 months, the opportunity to enter the world of fantasy had arrived again. Although the interval was indeed quite long this time, he didn't care. He excused himself to Hermione, saying he had something urgent to do, and hurriedly left the library, then set about preparing his supplies. After a flurry of activity, seeing that everything was packed and put away, Ino quietly lowered the thick bed curtains, sat down by the bed, and waited quietly. In a second, or perhaps even less, Ino was in the warmth of his dorm room, on the road he had taken from the town. Looking back, the town he had lived in for a month had vanished, leaving only a thin mist in an endless haze along the path. Countless experiences had made this scene familiar to him. Not to mention the distance he had traveled from the town. Even if he had taken one step outside, the next time he returned, looking back, it would still be difficult to find his way back. In fact, isn't life's journey like this? There's no way back, only the way back. After a brief moment of adjustment, Ino stood up, adjusted his wand in his sleeve, and picked up the suitcase beside him. He walked along the quiet path, never looking back, into the distance. What ended the road? Mountains. Beyond the mountains? Still mountains. This wasn't a joke, it was the truth. This journey took Ino 7 days, 7 days of sleeping in the open air. The endless mountain range not only reaffirmed his plan to buy a magic carpet for summer vacation, but also made him think of the ceiling of transfiguration, the animagus. He didn't expect to find a falcon or a raven, not even a flying beetle would have suffered the same fate. At first, He might have been able to hunt some of the bounty of the mountains and forests, improving his diet slightly. But since yesterday, everywhere he looked, he was covered in snow. Not even a single green plant was visible, let alone small animals. It was nothing but white, as if he were in a world of ice and snow. The journey continued as usual. After who knows how much time had passed, Ino finally saw a different view. Modern civilization. A lamppost, like a coordinate system, suddenly appeared not far away. The scene before him felt vaguely familiar, as if he'd seen it somewhere before. However, before he could dwell on it, the sound of footsteps caught his ear. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 37 The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. As the sound of footsteps approached, Ino grew wary. After all, the sudden appearance of a lamppost in such a remote area was already quite eerie, let alone the footsteps that sounded unnatural. A moment later, seeing who was coming, Ino quickly flicked his wrist, and the wand hidden in his sleeve instantly appeared in his hand. There was no way around it. This person before him, let's just call it a human, was truly eerie and strange. About 3 feet tall, only slightly taller than Professor Flitwick, but that wasn't the point. The main point was that it had a goat's head, a pair of pointed horns clearly visible, its lower body also shaped like goat's hooves, and it even had a short tail. Such a presence was truly formidable. Truth be told, sheep, or rather goats, have been associated with darkness, evil, lust, and violence in Western history since the days of ancient Greece. More importantly, Asmodeus, the demon of lust among the 7 deadly sins, was also presented to the world in the form of a billy goat. Meanwhile, the moment the wand appeared, the goat man across from him seemed startled and screamed, "Meow! A fellow of the evil witch! How terrifying!" The goat's terrified cry echoed through the silent frozen forest. Before he could argue, the other man dodged, striding away on 2 sturdy goat hooves, sprinting away like a gust of wind. A long pause. I was careless. Coming to his senses, Ino regretted his actions. Months of comfortable life at Hogwarts had almost made him forget the traditions of the fantasy world. After all, in all folk tales and fairy tales, wizards have always been portrayed in a rather skeptical light, as if they were either black or white. In contrast, princes, knights, even adventurers and soldiers, often enjoy more favorable treatment. Truthfully, his long-held identity as a bard was more of a neutral position. He wouldn't receive any extra kindness, but he also wouldn't frighten the goatman into running away screaming, as he was doing now. With that in mind, he immediately put his wand back into his sleeve. He then opened his suitcase, took out his accordion, fastened the straps, and slung it across his body. He didn't need to change his clothes, as plain robes weren't exclusive to wizards. Having done all this, he continued along the same path. He walked through a dense, dark fir forest, his feet treading on the thick snow. The sky was a gray blue, like the color of a clear winter morning. The surroundings were unusually quiet, the entire forest utterly silent. Not even a robin or a pine tree could be seen. The stillness was eerie, as if the goat from earlier was the only living thing here. And this made Ino regret his impulsiveness once again. I want to buy a magic carpet, learn animagus, and steal the sword from the hat to pretend to be a knight. Never mind, that's a bit difficult. I'll ask Malfoy to buy me a replica, he muttered to himself as he hurried on. After all, surrounded by endless white, and the stillness of the forest, he had to say something to keep his thoughts focused. Otherwise, if he encountered another unexpected incident, if he instinctively drew his wand again, then he wouldn't have to do anything on this fantastical journey, just strengthening his legs would be enough. Ding-a-ling, a second voice finally appeared in the distance. Ding-a-ling, confirming he wasn't hallucinating. Ino perked up, his expression losing its composure and a gentle smile spreading across his face. The sound grew closer. Finally, a sled pulled by 2 reindeer appeared before him. The reindeer were about the size of Shetland ponies, but their fur was a striking white, even whiter than the surrounding snow. Their forked antlers seemed gilded, gleaming like flames in the sunlight. Their sleds were made of scarlet leather, festooned with colorful bells that tinkled as they moved. The driver was a dwarf, about 2 feet tall, with a thick beard that reached down to his knees. Of course, none of this was a big deal. It was all very much in keeping with fairy tales and folklore. But what really struck Ino was the guest at the sleigh's main seat. A tall, slender lady, she held a pale blue crystal scepter and wore a golden crown. Her pale complexion and bright lips were a truly beautiful face. However, her beauty was marred by an aloof and cold demeanor, making her seem somewhat unapproachable. The wolf has brought word that a wizard has arrived in this forest. Is that you, little one? A cold voice echoed, and countless theories flashed through Ino's mind, but he rejected them all. Apologies, Mom, there may be some misunderstanding here. As you can see, I'm just a wandering bard. Ino patted the accordion hanging from his body. A bard? Huh? The noblewoman sneered, a dismissive glance before she raised her scepter. With a gentle flick, a sharp arrow of ice shot out. In over 2 years of travel, this was the first time he'd encountered such a thing. After all, who in a serious story would start a fight right off the bat? And such a silent, deadly blow, at that? Though he couldn't help but resent it, Ino acted without hesitation. Shatter. Long practice had given him an instant reaction. White light and the icy arrow collided in midair, shattering shards of ice ricocheting in all directions, firmly embedded in the towering fir tree. The sudden movement frightened the dwarf driving ahead, causing him to collapse to the ground. Neither of the two present paid any attention to this insignificant presence. So, a bard. The cold voice echoed again, not even changing its tone or context. Well, even if I'm a wizard, I don't think I'll get in your way, will I? Faced with a reality before him, he abandoned a pretense and struck back with his wand. Is it my business? This land is under my rule. Do you think it's a problem? As if confirming his suspicions, the other party's voice remained as cold as ever, but a slight softening appeared in his words. Given that, Ino didn't intend to fight to the death. Although he was furious and had taken action, in a fantasy world, kindness, redemption, and forgiveness were the main themes. In a fantasy world, holding on to hatred only harms both oneself and others. Excuse me, Mom. I'm new here and don't know the rules, Ino explained. Call me your majesty. Everything on the frozen land of Narnia belongs to me. Now, I command you to get in the car. Narnia? The White Witch. At the mention of that name, Ino's mind instantly conjured a series of bizarre images: Narnia, the wardrobe, the Goldman, the beaver couple, Aslan the lion. He was incredibly familiar with this long fairy tale that could rival even the most powerful. No wonder he'd felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity when he saw that lamppost just now. And now, the White Witch was still alive, and Narnia was frozen. That undoubtedly proves that the story here has yet to unfold. Even the 4 children who serve as the protagonists haven't appeared yet. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 38 Daily Life with the White Witch. Reindeer pulled the sled, galloping across the endless icy plains. Sitting beside the queen, Ino noticed something slightly unusual even at close range. Her skin was incredibly pale, her face, neck, even her hands, all gleaming white, like polished porcelain. The sight before him made him sigh. No wonder the kind-hearted Narnia natives nicknamed her the Evil White Witch. If she had a different complexion, who knows what other bizarre names she might have. Just as Ino was about to continue observing, a cold voice rang out again. What are you looking at? I'm checking how long it will take us to get to our stop. After all, we've been on the sled for a long time. Even though he was caught peeking, he remained calm and made up an excuse to get away with it. Call me your majesty. Very well. Your majesty, I was just checking the route. Ino readily changed her address. She had nothing to lose, and considering it carefully, the witch before her was indeed a legitimate queen. The witch let out a faint, barely audible sound from her nose. However, unnoticed, the sled's 2 silver fur pegs were now gleaming with a faint blue light. The soft snow instantly froze into a smooth surface wherever they passed. Fortunately, the icy plains lacked any reference points, otherwise the sled's speed would have increased significantly. It sped along at lightning speed. Finally, after crossing a frozen river, the sled reached a relatively flat area. The White Witch's palace towered majestically above the ice. Compared to the grandeur of Hogwarts, the entire frozen castle exuded a sharp aura. Because apart from the main building, The rest of the castle was dominated by towering towers, each slender tower standing like a line of spears, firmly guarding the surroundings. The sled came to a steady stop outside the castle's main gate. "Simon, park it. Then tell them to prepare for dinner." The White Witch stepped out first, then instructed the dwarf in front. Ino followed behind the witch, adhering to standard court etiquette, keeping a body length's distance from her. The two walked one after the other through a narrow corridor, arriving at the castle's main hall. As they walked, he noticed something strange. It was utterly silent here, not a single living being could be seen in the vast castle. Corridors, side halls, drawbridges, gardens, everything was covered in ice and snow, a veritable no-go zone for life. The only sound was the occasional crunch of his heavy boots against the snow. As for the White Witch, even with her 12 centimeters crystal heels, she made no sound as she stepped on the ice and snow. Horizontal ellipsis. Boom! The heavy stone door of the auditorium opened automatically. Figures scorched the air. Countless magical creatures stood in the hall. Huge centaur warriors, giants over 20 feet tall, dwarves armed with bows and arrows, minotaurs, goatmen, and even various ferocious beasts. But without exception, these figures remained in the same position, motionless. Just as Ino was about to take a closer look, the White Witch's impatient voice reached his ears. "Don't worry about them. They're just some former rebels, but now they've become decorations in my castle." Horizontal ellipsis. Time passed slowly. At dinner time, the White Witch's castle finally felt a little more lively. A dozen dwarves in uniform appeared in the auditorium and busily set the table, lighting candlesticks, passing dishes, and setting the tableware. After all this, they left quietly. At the table, Ino and the White Witch sat across from each other. "Tell me, why did you come to Narnia? If it weren't for our fellow wizards, you'd be a decorative statue by now," the White Witch asked bluntly. "Your Majesty, I come here for no particular purpose." Ino raised his head, his gaze blazing. "I'm truly just a wandering bard, learning a few magic tricks, mostly to equip myself to fight bandits on my journeys." Upon hearing this explanation, the White Witch didn't immediately respond. She stared into Ino's eyes for a long moment, then raised her head slightly, gazing out at the empty hall. The atmosphere grew tense, until— "All right, I'll believe you for now," the White Witch whispered. Phew. Ino breathed a sigh of relief. It was truly oppressive. As the de facto ruler of Narnia, and also a powerful wizard, the combined aura was simply too much for the average person to handle. Even Professor McGonagall, another powerful witch, pales in comparison. If we truly compare them, perhaps only Dumbledore can be compared. "Thank you for your trust," Ino said, bowing slightly as he stepped forward. "Sometimes, when you're under someone's roof, you really have to bow your head." He also found this dinner incredibly awkward, primarily because the White Witch's every word and gesture were so in tune with court dining etiquette. Her focused demeanor didn't slacken even for the mere presence of two people in the Great Hall. On the other hand, although he had learned some court etiquette from Teacher Hans, compared to the White Witch, he seemed a bit of a parody. There was no way around it. One was natural, born of habit, the other a clumsy imitation. The difference was truly vast. However, the awkwardness didn't last long. As the White Witch set down her cutlery, dinner was over. The dwarves reappeared, and after another flurry of activity, the Great Hall returned to its peaceful state. "Since you call yourself a bard, tell me a story," the White Witch instructed. He had no objection to such a reasonable request. Although he had been coerced into it, he'd been paid for a meal and a story, not too much. In the empty auditorium, Ino chose to tell the White Witch the story of the match girl, not only fulfilling his promise to old John but also incorporating his own experiences to complete the overall storyline. 10 minutes later, the accordion suddenly played a mournful tune. When the others found the little girl the next day, she was already dead, frozen to death on a cold Christmas day. Her lips were covered in a happy smile, her thin body leaning against the wall, as if she were asleep and dreaming. Boom. Just as Ino was about to thank them, a violent hurricane suddenly swept through the auditorium, blowing the surrounding furniture to and fro. Faced with this sudden change, he seized the opportunity, grabbed the accordion, and scrambled to hide behind a giant stone statue, thus avoiding the danger of being blown over by the hurricane. Frozen to death? So you blame the cold winter? If it weren't for her irresponsible father and that jerk uncle, she would have died. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 39 Humans found in the forest. Frozen to death? So you blame the cold? If it weren't for that irresponsible father and that jerk uncle, she would have died. The White Witch sat in the main seat, her voice colder than ever, devoid of emotion. Even at this chilling tone, the entire hall and even the vast plain surrounding the castle were suddenly covered in shimmering snowflakes. A mere mood could influence the celestial phenomena. The White Witch, who single-handedly froze the entire continent of Narnia, finally revealed a small part of herself at this moment. Seeing this, Ino understood. Perhaps, in that magical confrontation during the previous meeting, she had truly unleashed the seven oceans. Meanwhile, as time passed, the shimmering snowflakes in the sky began to merge with a fierce hurricane. As the blizzard approached, Ino regretted telling the White Witch tragic stories. She had assumed, as a villain, that the White Witch would appreciate stories that combined elements of ice and snow with a touch of tragedy. Who would have thought the other person could be so sentimental, so angry after hearing a story? The situation remained deadlocked for about 10 seconds. Just as a blizzard was about to form, the White Witch's voice echoed from the auditorium. Don't tell me these stories again. Forget it this time. As her voice fell, the entire auditorium suddenly became calm. Tap. 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 Ino hid behind the giant stone statue, listening to the crisp sound of high heels on the ground, and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. I should have told you a love story about a prince and princess. With a soft sigh, he stood up and began to search the auditorium for his suitcase. The hurricane had just destroyed the auditorium. A few minutes later, with the White Witch completely gone, the dwarf team arrived at the scene as promised, carrying various cleaning tools, brooms, buckets, mops. Seeing their efficient cleanup, it was clear that the dwarves had been well prepared, as if they were well aware of their queen's temper. Ignoring the busy dwarves, Ino, carrying his suitcase, slowly walked out of the auditorium. Dear guest, where are you going? He had barely taken a few steps out of the auditorium when a dwarf stopped him. Looking down, he saw it was the White Witch's coachman, Simon or something he knew. After attending His Majesty's banquet, of course I have to leave now, Ino half-crouched, looking the dwarf straight in the eye. Oh no. You may have misunderstood. In Narnia, you can't go anywhere without the Queen's consent. If you're tired, I'll take you to the guest room right now. The dwarf spoke in the most polite and assertive terms. Just listen. How different is this from imprisonment in disguise, and yet it's all just polite. What if I absolutely must leave? Ino said calmly. But before the dwarf could reply, he changed the subject. Okay, I was just kidding. I haven't seen enough of this beautiful palace yet. Take me to the guest room. With that, Ino felt the suddenly chilly temperature around him gradually return to normal. Despite countless greetings swirling in his mind, he could only accept the dwarf's offer with a smile. The castle's guest room. A room not lavish, but perfectly adequate, with a table and chairs fully furnished. After making sure he wouldn't be disturbed, Ino reached into his inner pocket, paused for a moment, and then pulled out a rustic dice. Today's events had unfolded so suddenly. From scaring off the goatman at the streetlight to his subsequent encounter with the White Witch, he hadn't had time to reflect. Now, thinking about it, perhaps, he'd been wrong from the start. If he hadn't drawn his wand to scare off the goatman, he'd probably be staying in the beaver couple's treat inn right now. It's always been like this lately. A comfortable life is really a slow poison. Unlike the villages and small towns he'd been in before, Ino knew full well that in an epic story like Narnia, the probability of encountering danger increased exponentially. Although the White Witch's storyline still evokes a fairy tale setting, a large-scale war still occurred, even if few lives were lost on the side of justice. Thinking of this, he turned his gaze to the dice in his hand. I will be in no danger in Narnia, I will be in no danger in Narnia. A faint murmur echoed through the room. A peaceful life often makes people ignore the existence of time. Yet, it exists in a very real way. When people regain their composure, they realize that a long time has passed in the blink of an eye. It was a sunny morning. The castle garden, well, perhaps it had been a garden, but now the entire continent was covered in ice and snow. Aside from a single ice blue rose, nothing could be seen. Ino sat in the garden, and across from him was the White Witch, dressed in a long dress and wearing a golden crown. At this moment, the prince suddenly awoke, recognizing his true bride. "Come, I will take you home," he said, taking the girl's hand and leading her into the carriage. The carriage sped towards the castle like a gust of wind, the bright windows not far away. As the story drew to a close, an accordion played a soft and beautiful melody. In this moment, the chant and the music blended perfectly, as if transported to the shore on a midsummer night, quietly enjoying the distant breeze and listening to the sea's lament. However, it seems that the purpose of all beautiful things is to be destroyed. Not far away, a huge black shadow was rushing towards the garden, sending snow flying in its wake. Upon noticing this, Ino immediately stopped playing the accordion and stood aside in silence. The shadow seemed to move swiftly, arriving at the garden in a moment. It was a massive wolf, its body the size of a calf and its razor-sharp canines a terrifying sight. The giant wolf crouched before the garden, panting heavily, its massive head lowered, its expression as respectful as could be. "Your Majesty, the great Queen of Narnia. My subordinates have discovered traces of humans in the jungle." The White Witch left, and the garden returned to its usual silence. The story is finally about to begin. Ino looked up at the gray blue sky. Before he knew it, he had resided in the snow castle for over 3 months. During this time, not only had he enjoyed a variety of delicious meals, but he had also enjoyed a great deal of freedom. Whether wandering the castle or practicing magic alone, the White Witch tacitly allowed him to do so. All he had to do was tell a romantic and complex love story every day. Yes, romantic and complex. After 2 months of interaction, Ino had a good understanding of the White Witch's temperament. She was a true artistic young woman. To put it bluntly, she liked love stories with happy endings but a bumpy journey. But this didn't faze him. As a qualified bard, adapting stories was a piece of cake. All I have to do is retell stories like Romeo and Liang Zhu, change the protagonists' names, alter the historical context, and then embellish them again. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add it to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 40. The story begins. After the White Witch and the giant wolf left, Ino returned to his room with nothing to do. He felt increasingly like he was eating soft glutinous rice. Imprisoned in the castle, he had no worries about food and drink, and all he had to do was tell the White Witch a story a day and keep her happy. But the thought of her constantly feeling melancholy and moody over the stories made him feel truly tired. That was not so bad, a little snack would always be enough. He now dreaded an ending like the 1001 Nights, where there was a story every night, and when there were no more stories to tell, the king would kill the storyteller. Returning to his room alone, Ino picked up practical household magic again and began to read. A strong iron must be forged. After all reluctance and lack of freedom stem from one's own weakness. It was strange to say, but so many in the magical world seem to care little for their abilities, even viewing magic as a mere tool rather than a means of survival. Take, for example, the book Practical Household Magic. Though a treasure trove, it's severely underrated, even languishing in library shelves, unread. Even if a few readers do find it, it's usually stay-at-home wives and housewives. Despite its low reputation, Ino didn't take it lightly. 3 months wasn't a short time at all. In the space of 100 days and months, he'd already mastered every musical instrument, even every cooking method. From cooking to daily household chores, he could now perform almost any kind of magic effortlessly, a far greater skill than he had 3 months ago. After all, whether it was cutting vegetables or peeling an apple, magic wasn't restricted to just one target. It worked just as well on people as fruits and vegetables. Time slipped by unnoticed when one was focused. Half an hour flew by. Just as Ino was about to practice shelling a lobster, a sharp knock on the door interrupted his train of thought. He rose and opened it, and, as expected, it was Simon, the former dwarf coachman. "Guest. From tomorrow on, you won't need to go to the garden on time. Everything else remains unchanged. If you need anything else, just come to me." The dwarf Simon brought the White Witch's new instructions. This was good news, but also a warning. After the dwarf left, Ino came to the window. Outside the castle seemed unusually bustling. Under the setting sun, the ice field was dotted with scattered dark shadows, wolves, hyenas, vultures. It was clear that the curtain had risen on Narnia, and the White Witch had no time to entertain herself with stories. But faced with such an epic story, she knew she could do nothing. Even being an audience member was unworthy. A sense of powerlessness washed over her. As a storyteller, unable to personally witness the unfolding of the story, it was undoubtedly a profound irony. Day by day, time passed. Narnia itself quietly changed. The sky, the earth, the mountains, the rivers, all silently transformed. And on the ice field outside the castle, more and more creatures gathered. At first, there were only wolves and vultures serving as scouts, but now there are minotaurs wielding great axes, majestic polar bears, and even 20-foot-tall cyclopses. Not counting those arriving gradually, the ice field is now a vast, dark mass, stretching as far as the eye can see. Judging by the situation, the White Witch seems to be gathering every army she can command. In contrast to the turmoil outside, Ino lives a peaceful and tranquil life in his room. Aside from his daily meals in the Great Hall, he spends the rest of his time practicing magic. He ignores the commotion outside, neither curious nor questioning. Even so, this tranquility doesn't last long. At dawn on the 7th day, the dwarf knocks on his door again. In the castle garden, Ino meets the White Witch, whom he hasn't seen for a long time. She seems even more majestic than before, radiating a breathtaking intensity. "Good day, Your Majesty," Ino whispers. But all he receives is silence. The White Witch sat quietly in a chair, gazing unturned at the single flower in the garden, seemingly indifferent to everything around her. After not seeing her for a while, the ice blue rose had become even more crystal clear. Seeing that she didn't want to talk, Ino sat quietly beside her, saying nothing if she didn't want to. He truly feared no one when it came to silence. Time seemed to have stood still, and in the vast garden, both of them lay motionless, like ice sculptures. A long moment passed. Spring is coming to Narnia. The snow is melting, and the rivers are awakening. The White Witch's voice was as cold as ever. Ino didn't rush to take up the conversation, remaining silent. After all, at such a time, the less one should talk, the better. Silence was the best response. After a brief silence, the White Witch spoke again. "You are the first person in centuries to live in the castle and be safe." As soon as these words left her mouth, Ino felt the urge to turn and run. After all, the hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of living stone statues in the auditorium were no joke. Who knew they might suddenly say, "You can't disrupt tradition." Just as he was secretly calculating his escape route, the White Witch's next words brought a sigh of relief, his heart finally settling. "Do you know why? Because you're the only one who wasn't hostile or flattering me, which I found very interesting. Of course, you didn't disappoint me either. The stories you told me later were truly interesting and brilliant. Thank you for your compliment and recognition, Your Majesty," Ino said softly. The art of language is this: silence when it's appropriate, response when it's appropriate. While the story is fascinating, I want to say that you don't need to change the original plot just to please me. Tragedy cannot be turned into comedy. Even if you force it, it will only be awkward. With this, the White Witch turned her head and gazed quietly into the sky. "Are you afraid? If so, you don't have to. If I truly wanted to hurt you, I would have done it long ago." The White Witch spoke slowly but forcefully, as if imbued with an air of undeniable authority. "Besides, with your half-hearted tricks, you stand no chance of resistance. You know that well. Even if fate favors you, you'll still be able to use a few divinations." Elsewhere, Ino was momentarily overwhelmed by the sudden showdown. He wanted to offer a few compliments, but a glance at her calm, indifferent eyes made all his lies vanish. Her sapphire eyes were as deep as the starry sky. Anyone meeting them would likely lack the courage to lie. After 3 months of living together, the White Witch felt incredibly unfamiliar. Far from being the artistic young woman he'd imagined, she seemed like a wise man who saw through everything but spoke without revealing anything. She understood everything, quietly appreciating everyone's performance. "Your wisdom is admirable, Your Majesty," Ino exclaimed sincerely. This time, he was really glad that the White Witch was just a villain in a fairy tale, not a villain in the traditional sense. "Ho ha ho ha." The White Witch laughed out loud for the first time. The silver bell-like laughter resounded in the castle garden, inexplicably beautiful. After a moment, the laughter gradually subsided. "Let's go. Leave here, leave the castle, go anywhere you want. Today is a transition, and it will be fine in the next 2 days. New book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please collect. Please recommend. Please vote. Please collect. Please recommend. Please vote. Chapter 41 The Dwarf's Honesty. The White Witch had let him go so easily? Ino was stunned, even wondering if there was something wrong with his hearing. He'd assumed the showdown today was to tie him to the chariot, but who would have thought she'd let him go so easily? He froze for a moment, bewildered. However, the White Witch seemed to possess a magical ability to read people's minds. Who do you think you are? The Supreme Code? I didn't freeze Narnia for 100 years with the help of minions. The atmosphere in the garden, which had just relaxed, suddenly turned cold again. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I just... Go away. Pack your bags now, take your accordion, and leave. I'll send a vulture for you. Facing the enraged White Witch, Ino felt a little frightened, yet at the same time, he felt he shouldn't have hesitated, just as a dragon never lies to a crop. There was really no need. Thinking of this, he didn't try to say anything more. With a slight bow, he quietly retreated. Castle Tower. Simon the dwarf pulled out a horn he carried with him, took a deep breath, and blew it toward the sky. Buzz! The deep blast echoed, and about 5 or 6 minutes later, a dark figure appeared in the distant sky. It moved with remarkable speed, reaching the tower in the blink of an eye. A strong gust of wind revealed a massive vulture, over 3 meters tall. It was a true bird of prey. The ratio of a bird's height to its wingspan is typically between 2 and 2.5, meaning this vulture's wingspan must have been at least 7 meters, easily carrying a person. Ino was pleased with the vulture, as it was crucial to their safety on the next leg of the journey. He had considered leaving by land, but the sight of the endless army outside the castle dissuaded him. It wasn't that he feared being blocked or causing trouble. After all, no one dared disobey the White Witch's orders. Rather, to quickly escape the central plot point, and with no other means of flight available, riding a vulture became the best option. Moreover, if one lacks the strength, then there's no need to join in the fun. This has always been his principle. He knew what was about to happen. War was inevitable. The White Witch's death had ushered in the spring of Narnia. In a war involving tens of thousands, joining in the fun was simply a matter of life and death. Although his thoughts raced through his mind, in reality, it was only a moment. After the vulture came to a steady stop, Ino, carrying his suitcase, walked towards the other party without hesitation. Sir, please wait a moment, the dwarf, who had been silent until then, said. Although some of these words are not for a servant like me to say, old Simon knows he won't live much longer, so he simply doesn't care. Upon hearing this, Ino stopped, turned around, and half knelt to meet the dwarf's eye level. Thank you for your care for the past 3 months, and I haven't even thanked you. So, if you have anything to say, just say it. The dwarf walked up to Ino, then placed a hand on his chest and bowed deeply. Thank you. Thank you for all your efforts during this time. The Queen hasn't been this happy in ages. While her happiness isn't immediately apparent, old Simon has been by her side for so long. The dwarf raised his head, his thick beard obscuring his features. This was Ino's first time observing the dwarf so closely. Normally, due to his height, he'd barely noticed him. But upon closer inspection, he noticed something different. The dwarf's eyes were surprisingly azure blue, with lilac markings in their pupils, a stark difference from the gray-eyed dwarves in the castle. But now wasn't the time to dwell on such matters. Ino politely responded to the dwarf's gratitude, no need to thank me. I'm the one who should say thank you. For the past 3 months, I've been so honored by the Queen's hospitality, and I haven't given much. He spoke the truth. After all, he'd been living a life of luxury, eating and drinking for free for 3 months. This was an indisputable fact. It's truly wonderful that you think this way, the dwarf said seriously. The expected mutual flattery didn't materialize. Perhaps sensing Ino's surprise, the dwarf explained, they all say the Queen froze Narnia, but they don't know that Narnia's supreme law excludes all unauthorized outsiders, denying them even the chance to submit. Old Simon's 6 brothers were killed for this very reason. The dwarf now sounded less like the taciturn servant he had been, and more like an old man reminiscing about the past. The Queen wasn't like that before, truly. Old Simon knows better than anyone. The moment you set foot on the snow, the Queen knew everything. You are the 3rd remaining unauthorized outsider in Narnia. So old Simon drove the sleigh with the Queen to fetch you. Because only in the castle are you safe, only there can you escape the supreme law. But that's no longer necessary, for it has no time for anything else. The dwarf's tone was indescribably heroic and carefree. The snow stopped. The sky over Narnia was no longer the grayish-white it had been before. A massive vulture soared through the azure sky, and the mountains and land burst into life as the melting snow blanketed them. Ino rested on the vulture's back, but he had no time to admire the beauty below. The dwarf's words before his departure had caused him to abandon his preconceived notions of the original novels and begin to reassess this land. While he knew the White Witch came from an alien world called Charn, the novels made no mention of her relationship with the lion Aslan or the High Code. Yet, he remained skeptical of the dwarf's words. While emotionally there was no reason for him to lie, rationally, he retained a certain skepticism. Narnia is a deep place, but fortunately, I'm only a visitor, Ino sighed softly. Right and wrong, good and evil, no longer mattered. The story of this land was drawing to a close. After a day's flight, the vulture landed in a quiet valley. The snow had melted, the earth had warmed, and the valley was teeming with life. Such a tranquil and beautiful setting made Ino reluctant to leave. He decided to stay, quietly waiting for the story to end. Before leaving the castle, he had deliberately glanced at the army on the icefield. The sheer mass of troops told him that the decisive battle was only a few days away. Time to go back. Whenever someone returns from a long voyage, they are always surrounded by children, for they have countless stories to tell. Ino hummed a lilting ballad as he surveyed the valley, making sure there were no wild beasts. Although his stay was only a few days, he never neglected safety. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42, Ancient Magic Before the Beginning. The Narnian night was ablaze with stars. But in the western sky, many had dimmed, with only one, the largest, still twinkling. On Stone Table Hill, a golden figure lay motionless on an ancient stone platform, and beside it, two weeping girls stood guard. We must untie the ropes. We can't leave Aslan lying here, said young Lucy, stretching out her tender hands and beginning to tear at the cords. It's too tight. We need tools. Susan, the eldest sister, though equally grief-stricken, retained her composure. She saw at a glance that the strong ropes were too much for them to untie with their bare hands. In the silent night, time slipped by. The temperature grew colder, even as Aslan, lying on the stone platform, still warm moments before, was now completely stiff. Lucy, we must go back, or Peter and the others will worry, Susan said, the first to emerge from her grief. But. No buts. We must return to camp before dawn. Susan pulled her younger sister up. The night was no longer so dark. A glimmer of dawn's light appeared on the distant eastern horizon. Just as Susan and Lucy were about to leave the Valley of the Stone Tables, a loud crash sounded behind them, like a giant smashing a huge plate. They looked back. The stone platform they had been on had been cracked in two from top to bottom, the same one that had caused the noise, but Aslan's body was long gone. Oh, this is terrible. Lucy cried. Who did this? Magic again. Susan looked around angrily. Yes. A loud voice came from behind them. But this is a deeper magic. The sun rose, and Aslan's whole body was illuminated by the morning light, a shimmering golden glow. His body was even larger than before, so much so that when the elder Susan rushed to embrace him, she only managed to touch his soft lion's mane. You're still alive, Aslan. Lucy smiled happily. Yes, my dear, I'm still alive. Aslan lowered his head and gently nudged Lucy. But this, we clearly saw you. Susan was at a loss for words. Here's the thing, Aslan looked up at Susan. The White Witch possesses ancient magic, but her knowledge only stretches back to the beginning, to the dawn of time. But if she could know further, to the silence and darkness before the beginning, then she would know that there are even more ancient magics there. Aslan explained the origin of his resurrection to the two. While Susan was lost in thought, The younger Lucy couldn't bear to hear such profound things. Taking advantage of the moment, she hurriedly asked, "So what now? What are we going to do now?" Aslan shook his mane. "Now we are going to help Peter and Edmund. We are going to fight for Narnia. But before we do, you two had better cover your ears." Although confused, Susan and Lucy obeyed. "Ah. Who?" Aslan opened his enormous mouth and, standing atop the mountain, let out a deafening roar, as if announcing his return. Fate seemed unchangeable, some things seemingly predetermined. Ino lived alone in the valley for 6 days. But on the 3rd day, the remaining cheese and ham in his suitcase were completely gone. "Well, besides the magic carpet and the animagus, I have to add another plan. I need to learn the extension charm, otherwise this suitcase really won't be able to hold much. Isn't that right, little one?" It was even more pitiful. Now, he could finally call someone a little one. Before him was a wood girl, or perhaps a wood elf. Less than a foot tall, she had human limbs and facial features, and radiated a shimmering green light. She looked somewhat like a botricle. He had encountered her while hunting in the mountains. Compared to the wood elves, who could understand human speech, this little one seemed dull and stupid, unable to speak or even think. For a moment, Ino suspected the wood elf was following him because he'd been ostracized by his own kind. After all, no one wanted to play with a fool. But regardless, for the past 6 days, he'd had someone to talk to, regardless of whether they could understand him or not. Meanwhile, after finishing his daily conversation, Ino turned his gaze to the berries he'd just gathered, a fruit somewhat similar to pomegranates and figs. Pulp separation. With that, a beam of magic struck a small pile of berries nearby. Then, as if manipulated by an invisible hand, the berries peeled away their bitter outer skins, revealing the fresh, red flesh within. To be honest, the berries were sour and astringent, and the texture wasn't particularly appealing, but it was his only source of food. After all, after hearing the hare beg for mercy, he'd completely converted to vegetarian, at least for the past few days. Meanwhile, the wood elf, who had been waiting eagerly, saw that the food had been processed and shuffled cautiously towards the berries. Then, he quickly picked up a fruit as big as his head and, without rushing to eat it, sat on the ground with a satisfied, goofy grin. Such scenes were nothing new to Ino, it was just a berry. In fact, he'd speculated more than once that the little creature's reluctance to leave might have had a lot to do with his generosity. After all, it was just feeding, it was normal for it to become reliant after a few times. After eating and drinking, Ino lay on the grass in the valley, gazing at the sky. This was one of his few ways to relax. Although the snows of Narnia had melted, and the valley was full of life, there was no other sound except the robin's call. Perhaps it was as the dwarf had said, or perhaps it was for some other reason, but the animals in the valley kept avoiding him. It had been the same with the hare before, and with the wood elves too. He couldn't figure it out, so he decided to let it go. He wouldn't be here much longer anyway. Perhaps it was human nature, it was impossible to be free from distractions. As soon as one question came to mind, another inevitably followed. His thoughts drifted, and he thought of the snow-covered castle, the white witch in the garden, and even old Simon the dwarf. "Merry Christmas, child." The sudden voice startled Ino, and he sat up instantly. Before him appeared another reindeer sleigh. But unlike the white witch's sleigh, this one was much larger, with 6 reindeer alone. Each reindeer had a miniature red Santa hat tied to its horn. "Don't be nervous. I mean no harm," said a standard-issue Santa Claus. He said this because his appearance, attire, and clothing perfectly matched the image of Santa Claus in every story. "I'm just an old man delivering Christmas presents." Mr. Rabbit said there were still people here who hadn't received their presents. "It's my fault. So, after returning home, I rushed here overnight. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket." Chapter 43 Santa Claus. Narnia's Santa Claus. Upon first sight, Ino recognized the old man's identity. But then, recalling the dwarf's parting words, he felt a tinge of unease. It couldn't be helped, for this Santa Claus, the most mysterious figure throughout the story, remained. Though he appeared only a few times, each time he arrived at a precise juncture in fate. Santa Claus was the first to herald the coming of spring in Narnia, And he also helped the protagonists grow. In the woods, he gave Peter the Lion King's sword and shield, foretelling that they would be needed soon. Sure enough, not long after, the shy young man used the sword in his first battle, laying the foundation for his future transformation into true king. He gave Susan a bow and arrows, as well as a horn that could summon help at any time, promising that by blowing the horn, help would be forthcoming, no matter where she was. These words later proved true. The most outrageous gift was Lucy's, a diamond-cut bottle filled with nectar extracted from the fire flowers of the Sun Mountains. Just a small drop could heal any wound, no matter how severe. And after the decisive battle, Lucy used it to rescue countless wounded, regardless of friend or foe. Santa Claus's appearances were always so ingenious, timely, and fitting. It was hard not to overthink it. While his imaginations ran wild, in reality, they were only fleeting. Ino quickly made a decision, not to provoke. Whatever the other party did, he wouldn't provoke the old man. If he offered, he'd accept. If he didn't, he wouldn't force it. After all, he didn't want to cause any trouble just before his return. With that thought in mind, he stood up and greeted, "Merry Christmas, sir. Actually, there's no need for you to make the trip. Just leave the gift in storage. It'll be the same next year." "Next year? I'm afraid I won't find you next year," Santa said with a smile. Well, winter had clearly passed, and Narnia was now awash with spring. But at that moment, Ino felt a deep chill. Ha ha ha. Don't overthink it. I'm just here to deliver presents, although. Santa paused briefly, glancing back at his surroundings before continuing with a laugh. Although someone has already prepared a present for you, it's someone else's gift. What I'm delivering is the true Christmas present. Santa then pulled a large red velvet sack from his sleigh. Half a man's height, it was so stuffed to the brim that no one could tell what was inside. Huh? I can't find your present. But it's okay, kid. What do you want? After all, I've got 100 years of undelivered presents. Faced with Santa's question, Ino felt like retorting, if you're not sincere, why don't you just not deliver it? It's awkward. How could Santa not find a present? Chun-Chun was joking. Despite countless internal complaints, he didn't show any outward expression. Instead, he declined, "Sir, I really don't want anything. If I can't find it, forget it. How about sunflower nectar? I happen to have a small bottle here. Or perhaps books from the primordial era? God knows why no one likes reading anymore. I've had these books at the bottom of a box for so long." Santa rambled on. As he spoke, he took out gifts. Soon, he had piled many items on the floor, even an amethyst scepter like the White Witch's. Looking at the dazzling array of items, Ino felt his heart beat uncontrollably. My goodness, there wasn't a single ordinary item here. If you were to categorize them by in-game equipment, they'd all be colored legendaries or orange heritage items. In short, the purple epic items were too embarrassing to display openly. His greatest interest was undoubtedly the 3 primordial books, radiating icy blue, fluorescent green, and dark black. Just as Ino was about to speak, he felt something hit his foot. He instinctively glanced down, and suddenly, a pristine 6-sided dice appeared at his feet. Perhaps it had been too long since he'd reinforced his pocket, or perhaps it was the sudden movement when he stood up, but the dice he'd used for divination had slipped out. As he bent down to pick up the dice, the image of Teacher Hans reappeared in his mind. Everything you desire actually controls you, the bard's song-like voice echoed in his mind. After a brief moment of distraction, Ino calmly picked up the fallen dice and carefully placed it back in his pocket. When he looked up again, a gentle smile graced his face. "Since you're letting me choose, could you give me a pair of cashmere socks? I prefer warm feet in winter to anything else." "Oh. I told you, I'm just here to give presents," Santa Claus seemed to have noticed and couldn't help but explain. "Since you've got the gift you wanted, then it's as you wish." As he spoke, Santa opened his bulging bag again and pulled out a pair of cashmere socks emblazoned with a red Christmas tree. The moment he took the socks, Ino made up his mind, he'd give them to Dumbledore this Christmas. He felt a wave of discomfort just holding them in his hands. He also wanted to greet Santa. What a grudge. What a deep grudge. As for digging such a massive hole, it wasn't a burial, it was like oil exploration, digging down relentlessly. Well, now that the gift's delivered, it's time for me to go. Before he knew it, Santa had packed up his belongings and climbed onto his sleigh. "You're a lucky kid, I have to say." I'll look forward to seeing you again." With that, he flicked the reins, and 6 of his majestic reindeer simultaneously exerted their strength. In the blink of an eye, Santa appeared outside the valley. When he vanished completely, Ino slumped to the ground like a deflated ball. It took a long moment before he slowly came to his senses, seemingly figuring out the problem. He'd performed a divination upon his arrival at the White Witch's castle, and the results had been encouraging. But it was precisely because of that encouraging reading that he'd unknowingly let his guard down, nearly leading to his fall. Now that he thought about it, Santa Claus's appearance wasn't dangerous, and he'd repeatedly stated he was only there to deliver gifts. He had the choice of the gift, and even if something did happen, it would only be due to his own greed, as the fortune teller's own uncertainties were never part of the divination's results. "Hey, little one. I want to go home, to Hogwarts. This is too complicated. Quirrell is cuter and simpler than him." Ino turned and, addressing the wood elf who had been watching the entire show, expressed his truest desire. "A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass." Chapter 44. End of the story. Cair Paravel Castle sat atop a towering hill, its horizon awash with sand dunes, jagged rocks, and the boundless sea. The castle's great hall was a magnificent sight, its ivory roofs and walls adorned with peacock feathers. Inside, before countless witnesses, Aslan solemnly crowned 4 kings: High King Peter, Lord of the Lonely Isles, ruler of Cair Paravel, ruling over all of Narnia and all the islands along its coast. Susan, Queen of the Horn, reigned over the vast meadows north of Archyland and Telmer. King Edmund the Just, Duke of Lanternwood and Earl of the Western Marshes, ruled over the wilds of western Narnia. Queen Lucy, Queen of Calormen. After the coronation ceremony, a grand banquet was held at Cair Paravel that evening. Everyone reveled and danced to celebrate this hard-earned victory, with the golden cups gleaming and wine flowing freely throughout the banquet. Likewise, the people of the sea, led by the mermaids, responded to the castle's melodious music with songs even stranger, sweeter, and more moving. Interestingly, amidst this rejoicing, no one noticed Aslan's quiet departure. Only Susan and Lucy noticed, but they kept silent. Young Lucy even opened her mouth as Aslan's receding figure, a silent farewell. The sun rose from the eastern horizon, heralding not only a new day but also a new chapter for the continent, the glorious and civilized age of the 4 kings. Meanwhile, in a valley in northern Narnia, Ino, after rinsing his mouth briefly with stream water, began to pack his belongings. A long-lost throbbing sensation returned, confirming that the story of Narnia had ended and that he was about to embark on his return journey. He rolled up the woolen blanket spread on the floor, sorted the books scattered on it, and then placed them one by one into his suitcase. As for the remaining berries, he chose not to waste them either. He pocketed a few intact ones and left the rest lying there, considering them his reward for the wood elf's companionship. Dinner's ready, little one." Ino called out to the valley. The wood elf, who usually served dinner on time, hadn't appeared, which puzzled him. He also decided to visit the tree where the elf had roosted, as a way of saying goodbye to this last companion. A few minutes later, Ino stood quietly beside the small tree where the wood elf had roosted. The original wood elf had long since vanished, replaced by an ice blue rose. It was identical to the rose he had seen in the White Witch's garden, the entire flower as if carved from azure crystal, its crystalline clarity like a true luxury. The only difference was the degree of bloom. The one in the garden before was in full bloom, while the one before him was nearing its end, with several petals drooping and precariously hanging from the pistil. You always see through the endings of the stories I tell you, but you never once question whether your life is someone else's story. Ino gazed at the rose before him, confiding in him as if chatting with a friend. After a long moment, he turned and left. When he returned, he held a handful of still melted snow from the valley. "I'm a laid-back person by nature and don't like being bound by rules. Yet, I must thank you for your kindness, but what I can offer in return is truly limited, and this is all I have." As he spoke, he carefully spread the snow under the rose's stem, as if it were still growing in the frozen garden. Perhaps from the shaking of the ground as he spread the snow, or perhaps for some other reason, 2 petals happened to fall into the back of his hand. They were cool, but not cold. Ino picked up the petals and placed them in his palm, examining them carefully. "Remember, In the garden before, due to the White Witch's authority, he had only ever seen this rose from afar, never daring to touch it. Let alone, as he was doing now, picking up a petal and holding it in his hand. That was unthinkable. Melted. He had clearly picked up 2 petals, but as soon as he held them in his palm, one of them melted at a visible speed. This sudden change caught him off guard. After a brief moment of shock, Ino quickly threw the other petal away. Just kidding, he watched the petal melt before his eyes, then slowly melt into his palm. While the White Witch was unlikely to harm him, experiencing this kind of horror once was enough. However, in his hand, there was no petal at all. It was clearly a piece of ice blue parchment, like a note, less than the size of a palm, covered with beautiful words. This is your reward. Leave Narnia and stop learning your half-hearted tricks. They're not worthy of being on stage. It was just a single line of words, but from the familiar tone and confident voice, Ino knew who it came from. He was a little puzzled by the reward the White Witch mentioned. He wasn't sure if it was for her storytelling or for the snow he had just delivered. But now that he had received the reward, he no longer dwelled on the reason. Thank you for your gift, Your Majesty. Ino thanked her heartfeltly. Unlike his previous reluctance, this time he addressed the White Witch with genuine sincerity. Although he didn't know the significance of the other petal, the contents of the parchment in his hand alone were enough to move him. It contained the White Witch's ice magic. Although the length of the paper limited the total, each one was incredibly practical, as if it had undergone countless quality inspections and been refined to its essence. The first one was the ice arrow that the White Witch had used casually on the sled. It was somewhat similar to HP's arrow release spell, except that this one was made of ice, allowing it to be released faster and more powerfully, even allowing for multiple arrows to be launched simultaneously. As for the others, Ino examined them carefully and then paid no attention. After all, just based on the contents recorded above, he was thankful to be able to barely release them after graduation. Elsewhere, the ice blue roses that had just swayed beneath the tree vanished in an instant, as if fulfilling a certain mission, like snow drifting in the sunlight. Goodbye, princess. With that, Ino picked up his suitcase and, without looking back, headed out of the valley. Horizontal ellipsis. A lone figure walked along the valley path, his shadow stretched thin and long in the slanting sunlight. From a distance, he resembled a lamppost carrying a suitcase. And Ino, like any wandering bard, journeyed alone to a strange land, witnessed the stories unfolding there, and when the stories concluded, he departed alone. Nothing seemed to have changed, yet everything had. Narnia's harsh winter had passed, and spring had arrived as promised. The story of Narnia had come to an end, but endings often also represent new beginnings. Chapter 45, Malfoy is frightened. Hogwarts. In his dorm, Ino slowly opened his eyes. After months, the familiar yet unfamiliar surroundings before him felt like a lifetime away. It was as if he had drifted off to sleep, spent his entire life in a dream, and upon waking, realized it was all a dream. He should have been accustomed to these things from his previous travels. But this journey was truly exhausting. It was nothing like the quiet, storytelling days of a small town, waiting for time to pass. The difference was simply too great. Hogwarts still feels so reassuring. Ino sighed heartfeltly from beneath the heavy curtains. He then collapsed onto the bed, his feet dangling halfway over the edge of the bed, his boots still etched in his relaxed state. In deep sleep, one often loses awareness of the passage of time, but equally, one also resents being disturbed. That night, Ino slept for 2 full hours. Until, all kinds of noisy sounds rang out in the dormitory, as if a tea party was being held. The bed curtains were pulled open. I say. Can't you be quieter? Is there no room in the common room for you? Why do you have to come here to chat? After being woken up, driven by his morning grumpiness, Ino got angry for the first time. But he didn't notice that the temperature in the entire dormitory dropped suddenly in the moment of anger. Even with a burning fireplace, it still couldn't dispel the chill. The 3 Malfoys who were scolded were all stunned, especially Crabbe and Goyle, who even showed a look of fear on their faces. This scene made Ino regret his previous behavior a little. He shouldn't have been so ostentatious. This was inconsistent with the plan made before. Thinking of this, he no longer had a stern face, but showed a familiar smile, and the temperature in the room no longer became so cold. Really? Can't you keep your voice down? I've only just fallen asleep. Sorry. I woke you up. I'm leaving now. Malfoy stumbled, regaining his composure. This was like a signal, instantly activating the entire scene. Goyle and Crabbe, as if under a spell, leapt from their chairs and dashed out of the dormitory. "Draco, it's okay. I was just a little grumpy after waking up. Don't mind me." Seeing Malfoy's slowness, Ino hurriedly explained. Honestly, if possible, he really didn't want to fall out with Malfoy. Not only would he miss out on a human alarm clock, but it would also be detrimental to his future in Slytherin. To be fair, the Malfoy family had some real power before the final battle, with connections from the Minister of Magic to the Dark Wizards of Nocturne Alley. And he genuinely wanted to befriend people like that, because getting their help could sometimes be quite handy. Meanwhile, on the other hand, perhaps it was the smile that had returned to Ino's face, or perhaps it was something else. Anyway, after a brief delay, Malfoy seemed to have recovered, his stiffness gone, returning to his normal self. "Ino, you should smile more often next time," Malfoy said seriously. "Merlin, you have no idea how intimidating that scowl you had just now was. Like Professor Snape, or even more so." After a long pause, Malfoy could only think of the headmaster as a comparison. "Don't compare me to Professor Snape," Ino interrupted quickly. "By the way, what were you three talking about just now? You were so animated." Listening to the tone, Malfoy decisively took up the new topic when he noticed Ino was unwilling to continue discussing the previous matter. "Tell you a secret. Scarhead, his henchman, and that big, stupid guy outside the castle have secretly raised a dragon. I just called them in to discuss a countermeasure." Malfoy spoke on and on, unaware that Ino's mind was wandering. Norbert had hatched, and Quirrell's life was entering its final countdown. It was hard to imagine. Sometimes Ino thought he'd forgotten all this. After all, for others, school had only been going on for 2 or 3 months, but for him, more than half a year had already passed. But in reality, everything about Hogwarts became clearer and clearer to him as time went by. As Malfoy was describing the dragons, a commotion erupted in Hagrid's hut on the lawn outside the castle. There were grumblings, cries, barking dogs, even the low moans of a young dragon. It was a bustling scene. If you ask me, Hagrid shouldn't have stopped Fang and sent the hounds after Malfoy. He wouldn't have gotten away, Ron said indignantly. Just an hour ago, their secret with Hagrid had been exposed, and Malfoy had seen Norbert the dragon clearly. Ron couldn't imagine how bad things would get next. He felt as if a stony-faced Snape could pop out from behind, beside, or around a corner at any moment. Elsewhere, Hermione, upon hearing Ron's words, stared at him in disbelief. "Sending a dog after Malfoy? What were you thinking? Don't you know it'll kill Fang? And even implicate Hagrid? And even if they catch him, what are you going to do? Kill him? Imprison him?" Hermione was frantic. The situation had already happened, and instead of thinking of a solution, they were just gathered here, blaming each other. "Fang's such a coward. Even if he catches up with Malfoy, it'll be useless. Poor Norbert, he's so young, and he's going to be captured," Hagrid said, wiping away tears. Harry, listening to Hagrid's sob, felt a pang of pain in his heart as well. For a moment, he suspected it was because he and Ron had accidentally leaked the information in the library. "We have to find a way to stop Malfoy. While there's still time, I'll go find him in Slytherin and talk to him," Harry said with determination, then stood up and headed for the door. "Man, you're crazy." Ron tugged at Harry's sleeve. "You're going to Slytherin? To the Dark Wizard's lair? I don't want to lose Norfolk and a friend at the same time." "Ron's right." Hagrid stopped crying. "Harry, don't go. If all else fails, I'll go to Headmaster Dumbledore. He always has a solution." Harry sank back into his chair, somewhat dejected. The situation seemed to have reached a stalemate again. In the silence, Ron suddenly spoke up. "I'll find Charlie. He's at the Dragon Farm in Romania. We can sneak Norfolk away before he's discovered." "But..." Hagrid seemed unwilling to give up. "No buts, this is the only way," Hermione interrupted. "What else can we do? Just throw him in the Forbidden Forest." Half an hour later, after some arguing, everyone in the hut agreed. Harry would calm Malfoy down while Ron wrote a letter to Charlie. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please bookmark. Please recommend. Please vote. Please bookmark. Please recommend. Please vote. Chapter 46. Hello, Professor Flitwick. Time always slips by unnoticed. the day after returning from Narnia. In the morning, Ino ended a deep sleep to the sound of passionate accordion music. Timed playback was a method he had figured out in the valley. During the last period of time, he was bored and could only fiddle with the accordion, humming tunes and recording. Besides, it was not a big deal to always use Malfoy's humanoid alarm clock. Sitting up from the bed, Ino took out the schedule from the bedside drawer. Slytherin, the first spells class in the morning, was very good. Even though the White Witch called the spells a low-level trick, it did not affect his love for spells at all. In fact, when he received the magic gift from the other party, he found the problem. The two were not in the same system at all, like a chicken talking to a duck. The White Witch was closer to the wizard in D&D, a high-damage, turret-based wizard. Compared to the magic of Hogwarts, it was more like a fairy tale, with imaginative spells and wish-granting transfiguration. One was born for battle, the other for life. When it came down to it, he still preferred the magic of Hogwarts. After all, it was all about enjoying life. In all the novels and biographies I'd read, it was hard to understand why the protagonists in those stories always went to such great lengths to reach the summit. Mountain after mountain, climbing endlessly. A lifetime of toil, only to miss out on all the scenery along the way, even if they managed to reach the summit. It was like the story of the fisherman and the rich man. There was no right or wrong, or perhaps both were right. But Ino sided with the fisherman, just as he sided with the magic of Hogwarts. He didn't want to interfere with others' lifestyles, yet he could still decide his own. On the 6th floor of the castle, in the charms classroom, Professor Flitwick, using his usual humorous style, explained the origins of the unlocking charm and its standard method for casting. He always made sure his students grasped as much knowledge as possible through lively and engaging lessons. This was the case with today's new spell, the unlocking charm. During class, Professor Flitwick not only brought a massive padlock taller than he was, but also had the young wizards take turns practicing it in pairs. The loser would be locked in a corner for the entire class. Time flew by in this playful learning environment, and the 90-minute charms class ended in laughter. Everyone filed out of the classroom, and Ino also gathered his books. Just as he reached the door, he heard Professor Flitwick's voice behind him. Mr. Swinburne. Please wait a moment, Professor Flitwick said, standing on his chair. Good day, Professor. Do you have any instructions for me? Ino had given up on the private lessons, but who would have thought that after 3 months, as if things were finally looking up, Professor Flitwick would finally call him back. Just a chat, if you have the time. Of course. It's my pleasure, Professor, Ino said cheerfully. Professor Flitwick had asked him to chat, and he couldn't refuse no matter what. Even if potions class was next, he wouldn't hesitate to skip it. That's good. Professor Flitwick nodded. Actually, I've noticed something since your first charms class. The magic power in you far exceeds that of others in your grade. You're a first year, but you feel like a third year. And now, only a week has passed since your last charms class, and you're feeling like a fourth year. Professor Flitwick finished his words in one breath, but Ino felt a pang of pain beside him. He had secretly left the orphanage to avoid the accelerated growth of his body. But, as fate would have it, he escaped the body, but not the magic. Professor Flitwick seemed to sense his students' distress and chuckled, everyone should have their own secrets. As a professor, my responsibility is to educate and guide, not to pry into my students' secrets. With that, Professor Flitwick looked up at the door and spotted a few more heads dodging outside the classroom. Having taught at Hogwarts for decades, he knew exactly what that meant. He calmly said, Mr. Swinburne. If you're not in a hurry, I'd like to invite you to my office. I have dancing cakes. Professor, you can call me Ino. As for visiting your office, it would be my honor, Ino replied with a smile. Meanwhile, he inwardly admired Professor Flitwick's wisdom. As for the few onlookers at the door, they thought they were hiding well, each one in a blind spot, unaware that their shadows had already betrayed them. Professor Flitwick's suggestion to go to the office wasn't a way to avoid gossip. After all, a soundproofing charm would perfectly solve the problem. There was no need for such an unnecessary effort. The other party did this simply to give him time to adjust, or to let him make up some plausible stories as much as possible, so that he wouldn't be caught off guard when the conversation started. If there was a sudden lull, both of them would be very embarrassed. In the charms office. Try it. Dancing little cakes. Professor Flitwick took out a plate of golden little cakes from the drawer like a child presenting a treasure. Faced with the invitation, Ino didn't hesitate and picked up one to taste it. However, the taste was beyond his expectations. It wasn't that it was so delicious, but that in the cake, he tasted the long-lost taste of his hometown. It wasn't the bland soup from the orphanage, but the real fried and stir-fried, for a long time. Ino slowly swallowed the cake in his mouth, and a trace of reluctance and attachment flashed in his eyes. Professor? That's magic. Professor Flitwick smiled. I baked these cakes with magic. It's much better than some people ordering from Honeydukes. What do you think magic is? Faced with Professor Flitwick's question, Ino quickly recalled the standard answer from the original novels, a question once posed by Mad-Eye Moody. Professor, I believe magic is the quality of the spell you cast. Just like when I cast a fire spell, it might only light the wood in the fireplace, while you could probably burn down a forest with the same spell. That's a strange analogy, but your fire spell does more than just light the wood, Professor Flitwick said half-jokingly, then changed the subject and said seriously, magic represents our inner selves, it has emotions. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 47, Breaking Through the Mist. Magic, Emotions, the Heart. Ino pondered Professor Flitwick's words. Honestly, he'd never considered these questions. He also knew that in the HP world, there was no specific concept of magic, it was rather categorized by age. As a young wizard grew older, their magic grew accordingly. Once they reached adulthood, their magic reached a saturation point, neither increasing nor decreasing. Only a select few could break through this limit, allowing their magic to continue to grow. But now, Professor Flitwick suddenly broached the subject, and Ino couldn't help but ponder the true role of magic. Of one thing, he was absolutely certain, magic and spells were two completely different things. To put it in a more realistic way, magic was more like an honorific title, with different magic powers corresponding to different titles. Wizards with this honorific title could cast more powerful spells. Wizards without it could still cast spells, but their effectiveness would be significantly less. However, a title was just a title, it wasn't a consumable good. Therefore, I've never heard of any wizard running out of magic power, such nonsense. After a while, Ino slowly raised his head. Professor, I don't quite understand. Although I've seen some records in books that some spells require the wizard's emotions to be released, this doesn't seem to mean that magic has emotions. Yes, emotions. I'm glad that you have the habit of going to the library to read in your first year. Professor Flitwick said with a smile. Do you know why Hogwarts begins to emphasize the qualities of the four houses from the moment the little wizards enter school? Ravenclaw's wisdom, Gryffindor's bravery, Slytherin's shrewdness, and Hufflepuff's loyalty. Ino opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but Professor Flitwick's voice came to his ears again. Yes. I used shrewdness. Professor Flitwick had an expression as if he had succeeded in a prank. Did you think I'd say ambition? That's foolish. While the vast majority of young wizards and witches who are sorted into Slytherin by the sorting hat deeply desire to make a difference, they all have clear aspirations, wanting fame, wealth, and even more. Professor Flitwick paused briefly, as if giving Ino time to think. But there's another type of person who's sorted into Slytherin. Although their numbers are pitifully small, you might not even see one for years. They do exist, and deep down, they often have a clear desire not to want something. That's why I used shrewdness. Desiring wealth and not wanting poverty are essentially the same thing. These shrewd young wizards, with their strong desire not to want something, will be placed in Slytherin by the sorting hat, because the hat only discerns emotions. At this point, Professor Flitwick suddenly adopted a nostalgic tone and spoke slowly. Some want immortality, others don't want to die. How ironic. Ambition and shrewdness, expressed in different ways, produce exactly the same effect. As Professor Flitwick finished his words, he suddenly spoke in a nostalgic tone, slowly saying, some want immortality, others don't want to die. How ironic. Ambition and shrewdness, expressed in different ways, produce the same exact effect. At that moment, Ino felt as if he had finally seen the truth, a fog piercing through. He knew why he had been chosen for Slytherin, a powerful inner desire, A deep sense of not wanting. Subconsciously, he didn't want to be part of the plot, didn't want to be near Harry, didn't want to participate in the upcoming decisive battle, and certainly didn't want to be implicated. And among the crowd of ignorant young wizards, suddenly appeared one with such intense subjective emotions, layered upon layer. Perhaps the emotional susceptibility of the sorting houses was a desire to sway the plot, to dominate Harry, to control his fate, and even more so, to control the course of the future. It would be truly unjust if such a person didn't choose Slytherin. A long pause. Thank you, Professor. I think I understand, Ino said sincerely. You're welcome. It's my duty as a professor. Professor Flitwick waved his hand dismissively. But that's not the point. What I want to tell you is that magical emotions are linked to the quality of the house. At this, Professor Flitwick sighed. Once upon a time, young wizards always struggled to find their true qualities, often leading them astray. It wasn't until the four founders established Hogwarts that we spent 7 years subtly shaping our students' qualities and magical emotions. This is a process, no need to elaborate. But your magical growth has been somewhat unexpected, and I'm worried that the shaping process isn't keeping pace. That's why I called you here today. Ino left the charms office. His recent conversation with Professor Flitwick had given him a new understanding of magic, or rather, a new understanding of wizarding as a whole. It turns out that sensibility can be cultivated from a young age. The four houses at Hogwarts are somewhat similar to the Muggle education system that fosters the right values. Professor Flitwick's goal was the same. The automatic education model couldn't keep up with magical growth, and manual integration was now required. If I could do it all over again, I'd definitely go into Ravenclaw. Ino sighed softly as he walked on the lawn outside the castle. Although Professor Flitwick's concern seemed unfounded, he was still grateful. This wasn't just a matter of resolving a problem between teacher and student, it was genuine concern. So-called dark wizards are essentially the product of distorted magical emotions, and teenage wizards are at the age when their minds are most susceptible to such distortions. But for someone blessed with innate wisdom, what they lack most is a mind and their already shaped perspectives. Outside the castle, Ino walked along the gravel path. Before he knew it, a dense forest blocked his path. A freshman check-in spot. Ino had no interest in the Forbidden Forest, just as he couldn't understand why so many people skipped daytime tours of the castle in favor of nighttime explorations. But honestly, standing outside the Forbidden Forest, gazing at the deep, mysterious woods, he felt a bit like Alice in Wonderland. Of course, if you ignored the werewolves, trolls, and dark wizards in the Forbidden Forest. Suddenly, Ino froze, his expression stiffening. What he thought was coming true. What had just been a stroll along the edge of the forest had now become a true jungle adventure. Before him stood Quirrell, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, who seemed unprepared to see someone waiting at the gates of the Forbidden Forest. A sudden hush fell in the air. Their eyes met, both caught off guard, and the situation briefly descended into an awkward stalemate. Quirrell's thoughts were swirling. The fight with the adult unicorn had already exhausted him, and on top of that, the curse and the unicorn's blood. Now, facing the sudden appearance of the student, he instinctively reached for his wand. Idiot. What are you doing in broad daylight? Say hello and get back on your way. The sudden voice in his head brought Quirrell back to his senses, yet at the same time, he felt a pang of fear for his actions. If he had openly attacked a Hogwarts student here, he wouldn't even have to go through with a trial. He would have been sent to Azkaban and given the Dementor's kiss. Good morning, Professor Quirrell. After a brief moment of astonishment, Ino was the first to break the silence, his right hand already tightly grasping the wand. As for his left hand, it had already silently reached for the inner pocket. In that instant, he really felt that Quirrell wanted to take action. Hello, students. Don't go near the Forbidden Forest. I have something to do. Goodbye. New book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend. Please vote. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend. Please vote. Chapter 48, Re-Understanding Myself, Wind and Eagle. The feeling of brushing past Voldemort was truly indescribable, but thankfully, it was over. Quirrell waved his sleeves, leaving no trace of his presence behind. Watching the gradually disappearing figure, Ino couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Inside the castle, Quirrell walked weakly up the stairs, the dreaded voice echoing in his mind again. Find a chance to contact that student, but... Master, what about your plan? Quirrell was puzzled. He had painstakingly laid out a plan that was about to succeed, only to suddenly change. Plan? That was just a game between my dear professor and me. The only reason it can continue is because I want to know what he's relying on. Master, silence. Hearing the command in his mind, Quirrell tactfully shut his mouth. He knew the consequences of disobeying orders, enduring the excruciating pain once was enough. Similarly, at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Ino didn't realize he was being targeted by Voldemort. This was perfectly normal. Professor Flitwick could see the problem at a glance, so there was no reason Voldemort couldn't see it either. Perhaps this is what they call those in the know are often confused. Anyway, after Quirrell left, he had no desire to stay any longer and instead changed direction to continue his walk. Walking along the edge of the castle, Ino realized he'd been misled by books and movies. He'd always assumed that the castle's surroundings, aside from the Black Lake and the Forbidden Forest, weren't anything special. But upon arriving at Hogwarts, he realized the vast expanse beyond the castle was truly vast, and filled with interesting things to do. Whether standing on the long bridge to watch the sunset, strolling across the plains to listen to the sounds of the wilderness, or even throwing rocks at the Whomping Willow when bored, wasn't it more interesting than breaking school rules and sneaking into the Forbidden Forest? Furthermore, the castle wasn't just the main building that flashed by in movies and TV shows. It was surrounded by countless other buildings, forming a vast complex. The most unique of these was the herbology greenhouse in front of Ino, resembling a greenhouse plantation. One greenhouse after another was built beside the castle, its square shape like whelpland fields on the plains. Looking at the countless potted plants in the greenhouse, he also had the idea of planting a couple of plants in his dorm. While Slytherin was already green enough, this vibrant green was completely different from the emerald green of mystical magic. It would have been nice to be sorted into Hufflepuff. I could have planted some crops and tended some flowers. Since the start of term, Ino had repeatedly heard the Badgers brag about their common room, how it was so close to the kitchen, allowing for easy late-night snacks, and how the dorms were decorated with all sorts of flowers and plants. Even more outrageous was their head of house, Professor Sprout, who, whenever she noticed the Badgers wanted to grow some plants, gave them the green light, providing everything from potting soil to fertilizer, even opening up the greenhouse. Next to the greenhouse, a variety of ceramic pots lay cluttered together, a collection of defective items deliberately placed there by Professor Sprout so that the students could use them to cultivate their own plants. The generosity and kindness of the Hufflepuffs are particularly noteworthy here, as Professor Sprout always treated everyone equally, never discriminating based on house. If students from other houses wanted to grow a few plants, she would also fully support them. Horizontal ellipsis. Looking at the dazzling array of pots before him, Ino immediately knelt down and began selecting. While most were of the same type, he at least had to identify the cracked or half-broken ones. Remember, the pots here looked numerous, but they were actually the ones left after the Badgers had gone through several rounds of sorting. Finding something useful amidst the debris was a unique pleasure. Thus, he passed through greenhouse after greenhouse. While others might have considered the discarded pots piled behind the greenhouses worthless, he found the joy of opening a blind box, and he relished it. Before he knew it, he had already passed several greenhouses, and just as he was about to open a new blind box, Ino suddenly stopped. A faint cry reached his ears. That sound was all too familiar. Like the child who was burned in the orphanage, clearly in pain but afraid to cry out loud, he could only hide in a corner and weep silently. In the past, his voice was insignificant, powerless, and he could only watch in silence. But now, he had to intervene, no matter what. Not only to make up for past regrets, but also after today's conversation with Professor Flitwick, he no longer wanted to become a true Slytherin. Being too shrewd and cunning only became another form of constraint. The swift wind, surrounded by the blue wings of the eagle, waiting for the wise to hold the crown. He murmured softly. His innate wisdom and experience had given him maturity, making him carefully consider and reconsider everything before taking action. His 10 years in the London orphanage only reinforced this habit, where even the slightest mistake could lead to disaster. His subsequent journeys into fantasy worlds had made him a true spectator, observing everything around him with a cold eye. At that moment, Ino finally saw his own heart clearly. From the beginning to the end, what he really longed for was the wind and eagles soaring freely in the sky, rather than the cold-blooded vipers standing by and watching everything silently. After figuring everything out, Ino turned and walked towards the source of the crying. With each step, he could feel his body getting lighter, as if the heavy objects he had been carrying for a long time were being unloaded piece by piece by an invisible big hand. He walked slowly forward step by step. In the corner outside the next greenhouse, he saw a little fat man wearing a robe with a red color of Gryffindor. "Are you okay? Can I help you with something?" Ino squatted down and asked softly. "No. I don't need it, thank you." The little fat man buried his head in his knees and said. As if he felt that this was a bit impolite, he slowly raised his head, and saw a hint of green robe edge. "Please. Malfoy promised to let me go today." Seeing the pleading face across from him, Ino's mind flashed back to an old word, bullying. It was obvious the victim was the chubby boy in front of him. Thinking of Malfoy's timid nature, he quickly zeroed in on one person. The only two people in the story worthy of wielding the Sword of Gryffindor, also known as the True Sword Master, Neville Longbottom. "Sorry, I mean no harm. I'm just asking for help. I want to grow some potted plants, but I don't know where to find the right soil," Ino said slowly. Facing the situation, he knew that to help Neville, he had to lower his guard. Potted plants were undoubtedly a great topic for future herbology professors. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, Communication by the Greenhouse. The Slytherin in front of him was different from the previous ones. Neville recognized him. It was the man Ron had talked about in the dormitory, a man even worse than Malfoy. Thinking of Malfoy, Neville shuddered subconsciously. Seeing this, Ino couldn't help but sigh. He reached into the pocket of his robe and took out a berry that he had eaten in the valley. "Look, I have the seeds ready. It's this kind of berry." As he said that, he put the berry in the palm of his hand and spread it out for Neville to see. Ino didn't invite Neville to taste it. It was not because he was stingy, but because in the wizarding world, eating food from strangers is a very dangerous thing. If he really invited Neville to taste it, it might even further stimulate him. On this side, Neville also stared blankly at the palm of his hand spread out in front of him, and an emerald green berry came into his sight. He was silent for a long time. "It looks a bit like a fig, but I haven't seen it, so I can't be sure," Neville muttered softly. Feeling his response was a bit perfunctory, he quickly added, "But these plants generally prefer a cool, moist environment. You might consider digging some moist soil near the Black Lake." Neville finished his thoughts in a halting breath, then quickly lowered his head like a child who had done something wrong. But Ino wasn't about to give up. Instead, he praised him with a somewhat exaggerated tone. "Thank you, buddy. That's a big help. By the way, my name is Ino Swinburne, and as you can see, I'm a Slytherin too." Neville was taken aback by this sudden friendliness. After a while, a faint voice rang out, "My name is Neville Longbottom, and I'm a Gryffindor." Ino ignored the tone of the voice. He knew that even for a child who had been bullied to the point of self-absorption, the mere fact of him speaking was a sign of great kindness. "Can I call you Neville? You know, I have a lot of shortcomings when it comes to gardening. I might need your advice on some more in the future." "I don't really understand either," Neville muttered. "I really don't. Although I've been taking care of my grandmother's garden at home, and the flowers are growing beautifully, I don't really have any advanced knowledge." He raised his head cautiously, as if afraid of being irritated by his inappropriate remarks. Ho ha, that's enough. This isn't some precious herb, just a berry," Ino said with a smile. Half an hour later, Ino, carrying 2 ceramic pots filled with moist soil, walked towards the castle. He didn't talk much with Neville. Too much talk on a first meeting would be counterproductive. Similarly, he didn't make any promises to Neville, like stopping Malfoy's behavior. The reason was simple: if Neville didn't change himself, even if Malfoy didn't, someone else would appear. Human nature instinctively stratifies people into different classes. While they curry favor with those who are stronger than them, They also seek out those who are weaker or easier to bully, finding pleasure in teasing and mocking the weak. This is the nature of fools, and no one can change it. All he can do is help Neville regain his inner courage and confidence. That's all. After all, he can't take care of Neville forever. With this in mind, Ino entered the castle gates. His progress had drawn some attention. Think about it, a fair-skinned, handsome boy clutching two large flower pots, something appealing. Of course, there was nothing wrong with his so-called aggressive stares. If they wanted to, they could watch. He couldn't control their gazes. But some of the older students kept looking at him with meaningful glances, which made him feel uneasy. Under this unnatural scrutiny, Ino couldn't help but quicken his pace. Pure blood. He uttered the correct command into the stone wall, and before the wall had completely cracked, he slipped into the Slytherin dormitory. Whoa! But before he could even catch his breath, he heard a crisp voice behind him. Mr. Swinburne. What are you doing? Planting some plants. In a corner of the common room, Pansy sat bored on the sofa, chatting with a few girls around her who qualified as her friends. The girls' conversations were largely similar to the boys. Aside from some of the hottest castle gossip, the rest was all about the boys. However, the chatter abruptly ceased when Ino entered the common room, leaving everyone's eyes lightened, yet no further action followed. This, in fact, illustrates the pervasive hierarchy of Slytherin. Just as in the books, it's impossible for a man of Malfoy's caliber to be alone with Pansy. Yet, in reality, there was only Pansy. It wasn't that the other girls were unwilling, but rather that the strict hierarchy was ingrained into their bones. Unless you're just a lackey, it's hard to even be friends, let alone fall in love. Just like that moment. In the small circle in the corner, only Pansy stood up and walked over to greet them. Hearing the voice, Ino also stopped and slowly turned around. Good afternoon, Miss Parkinson. Are you going to plant some potted plants? Pansy asked curiously. They won't get any sunlight in the dorm, and I happen to have a book about sunlight spells at home that I might lend you. This kind of polite curiosity always warms people's hearts. Of course, Ino also remembered Pansy's arrogance and condescension when she scolded Goyle. But that had nothing to do with him. On the contrary, Pansy had always been polite to him. Thinking of this, Ino decided to accept her offer. If you can, that would be great. Thank you for your generosity, Miss Parkinson. Ha, just wait for my news. Before Christmas at the latest. Pansy's reaction was a bit unexpected. She was clearly giving something, but it felt like she was accepting a favor. It was a bit strange no matter how you looked at it. But Ino didn't bother to guess what the other person was thinking. He simply thought, seeing him share a dorm with Malfoy, that he might be able to help with some intimacy or some conversation in the future. It wasn't a big deal. Thank you in advance. I'll get you a present for Christmas, too, but I need to put them back in the dorm now, Ino said, glancing at the two flower pots in his arms. His meaning was clear. Go. Plant the seeds first. I'll write home soon, so you won't have to wait too long. In the dorm. Looking at the two ceramic flower pots on the table, Ino gradually fell into deep thought. Today's experiences had been nothing short of fantastical for him, from his conversation with Professor Flitwick after Charms class this morning, to his chance encounter with Quirrell at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and then to spotting Neville near the greenhouse. One thing led to another, and it felt like today hadn't been as much as he'd experienced in the past month combined. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please bookmark. Please recommend. Please vote. Please bookmark. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly ticket. Chapter 50, Ice and Snow Magic, The White Witch's Legacy. Sitting alone in his dorm, he pondered for a long moment. Then, from his inner pocket, Ino pulled the parchment left by the White Witch. Since he had chosen unfettered freedom, he also needed the confidence to enjoy it. The White Witch, who had frozen the entire continent for 100 years, was undoubtedly his best teacher. He didn't need to inherit everything, even half her power would be rare in the HP world, but it would be enough for him to be free. At his desk, Ino examined the parchment carefully. It contained only 3 spells. Each spell had detailed instructions, extended applications, and corresponding emotions. Yes, emotions. This made him feel even more strongly that the White Witch's magic wasn't that of a mage, but rather a sorcerer. As for the key to unlock the parchment, or the prerequisite for learning ice magic, perhaps, it was the other petal that had melted. In the quiet of the dorm, the passage of time was barely noticeable. An hour later, Ino folded the parchment again and carefully placed it in his inner pocket. He then took several deep breaths, slowly calming his emotions. His expression, demeanor, and mood, he tried his best to mimic the White Witch in his memory. Meanwhile, the temperature in the dormitory began to drop. While he couldn't alter the weather with a wave of his hand like the White Witch, the moist oil in the 2 ceramic flower pots on the table had already condensed into frost. Frost shoot. In mid-air, an arrow of pale blue ice crystals slowly formed. After a brief delay, 2 more identical ice arrows condensed next to the original arrow. As the person involved, Ino was also feeling a sense of relief. Sensing that the number of ice arrows wouldn't increase, he raised his wand and aimed them at an empty dormitory wall. With a wave of his hand, 3 ice arrows shot out instantly. In the blink of an eye, the ice arrows slammed into the wall with great force. There was no spectacular special effect as expected. There wasn't even a trace of damage to the wall, only shattered ice shards. Yet, even with this result, Ino was very satisfied. First, the speed. The ice arrows were incredibly fast, even exceeding the speed of all his current spells. Second, they lacked the noticeable light effects of other spells. The pale blue, almost transparent arrows were difficult to detect, not only in the dark but even during the day. As for their power, this was the castle's main building. If it were so easily destroyed, Hogwarts wouldn't have stood for 1,000 years in the Scottish Highlands. While satisfied with all aspects, Ino knew this was far from the ice arrow's limit. The parchment clearly stated that the White Witch had once condensed thousands of ice arrows into a curtain of arrows, annihilating an entire air force of griffins in one fell swoop. Although this was a brief statement, perhaps even absent if it weren't for the emphasis on the magic's extension, he still felt the allure of this magic. Simply put, it was infinitely multiplying. The power of the arrows depended on the power of the arrows. And from the experiment just now, Ino had a relatively intuitive understanding. With his current magical power, 3 arrows might not be the limit, but 7 wouldn't be the maximum. Therefore, he could only strive to improve his condensation speed and shooting accuracy. After all, without firepower coverage, he could only focus on precision strikes. For the rest of the day, Ino had a blast in his dorm room, firing single shots, 3-shot bursts, and even firing in a V-shaped pattern. He even had a sudden thought: if he could one day achieve wandless firing, equipped with a longbow, he could pretend to be an ice archer. He had a lot of fun, but the dorm fireplace was suffering. The small fire struggled in the freezing temperature, the feeble flames looking ready to go out at any moment. Likewise, the walls, tables, and even the bed frame were covered in frost, with some areas even covered in icicles. However, Ino seemed oblivious to all this. For years, since entering this world, he had always been cautious wherever he went and whatever he did, never experiencing true exhilaration. Today, after being freed from his shackles, he knew that performing magic in his dorm would be discovered and even reported to the professor, but he didn't care. Moreover, in this icy environment, Ino not only didn't feel the slightest bit of cold, but he even thought the temperature wasn't cold enough. It was as if he was naturally adapted to extreme cold. The colder it got, the more comfortable it was. 2 hours later, the dormitory door opened. Oh my Merlin! Help! Malfoy, having finished a day of wondering, was about to return to his dorm to rest. But the moment he opened the door, he was hit by a gust of cold air. Fortunately, wizards are more resilient than muggles. With frost on his brow and frozen eyelids, Malfoy let out a final cry. Then, like an ice sculpture, he collapsed to the ground. This sudden change made Ino realize the seriousness of the situation. Similarly, as the cold air spread to the Slytherin common room, all the young wizards still there noticed something was wrong. Potions office. The atmosphere in the room was subdued, the 2 lit candlesticks swaying silently, adding to the solemnity. Ino stared at Snape, his face expressionless, wanting to explain, but he didn't know how. This incident had become quite a mess. While he didn't know the extent of Malfoy's injuries, it was a fact that he had been carried to the hospital wing by everyone. He had considered joining in to help, but was restrained by the arriving prefects. He then received a ticket for a day trip to the potions office. Time slipped by. Let's forget it this time, Snape said slowly. No more practicing magic in the castle. The Black Lake, the Forbidden Forest, the Quidditch pitch, whatever you want. Hearing this, Ino couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Although he was somewhat curious about Snape's change of heart, he hadn't even pressed the issue. But this outcome was the ideal one. It truly wouldn't happen again. Just when he thought the matter was over, Snape's calm voice reached him again. "I'll personally write to Lucius about the Malfoy matter. You don't have to worry about anything else." "Thank you, Professor." Ino's gratitude came from the bottom of his heart. If Snape hadn't reminded him, he would have almost forgotten the power of the Malfoy family in the British Isles. If this matter really didn't have someone of significance to endorse it, he wouldn't have a good summer vacation. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.